Hi, folks. Hopefully some people can see me. I got a second monitor, and so I'm trying to see how this works in terms of. Monitor, and so I'm trying to see how this works in terms of. Oops, maybe it's not working working right because I've got a couple of sounds. So let me see if this works. Okay, so I think this is gonna work. If you're there, hi, thanks. So if you can't hear me for some reason, let me know. Otherwise, I'm gonna presume that it is working, and I'm gonna start. So I'm here tonight. I'm doing reading. Again, from the Swarm Intelligence book, and I'm excited about that. Let me just, I'm going to see so I can see myself. If you can't hear me for some reason, please leave it in the chat. That would be great. And so tonight, I'm going to try to do a couple things. I'm going to read one of my posts from about Mondragon, a follow-up on the refugee series. And then I'm also going to be doing doing some maps. So this is what I'm going to try to do. Yeah, and if you're here, if you could just tell me if you can hear me right, because this is sort of a new thing for me. Oh, good. Okay, that's great. Because I have the second screen and I'm not really sure how to do all of the things. All right, good. So I can hear everything. Okay, so I have three things that I want to do tonight. I want to read aloud from one of my. Let me see if. Oh, look. Oh no, that doesn't work. Let me do that down. From this blog about Mondragon. So I'm going to do a little read aloud from that. I'm going to do some stuff from Swarm Intelligence about social impact theory. And then I have this cool map that I've made. You guys probably are familiar with some of my Kumu maps. And so I want to sort of walk through, actually maybe before I read the blog post, I'm going to read from the Swarm Intelligence. I'm going to do some related stuff on the map, and then I'm going to read the blog post, and it should all go together. So awesome. Very excited about that. So I will get started. So today I was reading, this is in another chapter called Culture in Theory and Practice. And one of the sections here, this is chapter 5 of Swarm Intelligence by James Kennedy and Russell C. Eberhardt. And this is a section called Lataine's Dynamic Social Impact Theory. So hopefully you can see that. And it's about 5 pages, but I think it's very relevant to what we're going to be talking about within the map and within sort of the tokenized democracy smart city movement of Mondragon in Spain and the Focolare movement. So I'm going to just start by reading aloud. And again, if you've sat through these with me before, you know it might be a little bit on the dry side, but I think we need to know their tools. And again, this book is about 20 years old, right? So we're already 20 years behind the times, like just getting up to speed with how they think about things. But understanding, I think, what is going on within this Fourth Industrial Revolution and the changes that are underway as something that relates to cognitive science, AI, data collection, the quantified self, and the simulation and social simulations is super important. So this one isn't going to be super long. It's about five or 6 pages. Okay, so Lataine's dynamic social, and before I start, let me move it over to here so you can see. So this is the image that I thought was really interesting. You can see, oh, you know what, let me go over and make it like that. Oh, nope, that doesn't work. I guess it's gonna have to be like that. So you can see the target. So this is like the social impact theory target that they're doing, that they want to, oh, maybe a picture in a picture. There we go. So this is the image that I texted Jason, Lynn, and Drew this morning, because I'm like, oh my gosh, look, in 1981, they were already working on social impact theory formulations, already in 1981. So this whole social impact theory for finance, I think, ultimately also goes back to the AI. And this idea that there are forces that are hitting the target, and they vary. They vary in intensity, they vary in distance, and they vary in number. And so that's what's represented by these different spheres and the different shapes of the arrows in terms of deforming the target to have the impact on the individual within society. And so this image reads, in Lataine's original social impact theory formulation, impact on the hapless target was a multiplicative function of strength, immediacy, and number of sources of influence, from Latane, 1981. So again, strength, immediacy, and number of sources of impact. And I see all of those as different kinds of intensities of nudging. So in the other corner of the screenshot that I have for people who might be just listening in and they don't see the video, it's a sheepdog with some rams outside of a fence. It looks like a competition. So I have sort of the sheepdog identified as the digital nudges, and the rams in like a little cluster as natural life, and then the gate on the other side of the gate is the simulation that they're trying to move us into. And then just to make it a little bit more complex with this, I have let me see. Oh yeah, so this is a second slide. I've been mentioning a number of times these Voronoi crystals, and this idea of that this green crystal here with all the different planes of intersection is maybe how I imagine our digital twins are represented, and that these crystals deform and reshape across the fourth dimension of time. So if you, in this image, there's sort of like a little green crystal, very many facets in a box with planes that intersect, and it's in a container. And so there are these like lines coming off the points, the deformation points. And next to it, I have an image of a Kermit the Frog balloon, parade balloon that's being tugged along by all of the balloon wranglers. And then it's a similar green shape that's being tugged and pulled by the strings down the street for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. So I think these are useful ideas to consider when we're thinking about digital twins and social impact theory and how it's all working for us. Okay, so Lataine's dynamic social impact theory. In 1913, a German social psychologist named Ringelmann asked people to pull on a rope attached to a dynamometer individually and in groups. A dynamometer measures the strength of force applied to it. Ringelmann was measuring how hard people pulled on the rope. His interesting finding, now known as the Ringelmann effect, was that groups of people pulled with a strength that was considerably less than the sum of their individual efforts. With each additional person pulling on the rope, it appeared that each one pulled with a smaller proportion of their full strength. The relationship between N, the number of people, and the total force was monotonic, meaning that force increased with N, but the increase was negatively accelerating as the size of the group grew. The force with which they pulled grew slower. And that's sort of the image. Oh, I see. You guys can't really see it that well. So there's the image there. Maybe I can go back to, let me see. No, that's not it. 2? No, I'm going to have to do it. Sorry, I'm figuring out how to do all of the slides on top camera. Okay, so this is the force is growing, but not an equivalent to the number of people. It's slowing down the amount of force as the group grows. Through the middle of the 20th century, results similar to these were found in numerous social psychological studies of group influence on the target individual. As the sources of influence increased, the amount of influence increased, but the increase of the influence was slower than the increase in the size of the group. In 1981, Bib Latane summarized these results and reported on a rather large accumulation of evidence from numerous laboratory and field experiments. For instance, his research with John Darley on helping behavior and bystander intervention, exploring the conditions under which people will and will not help someone in need, had found that the probability of any individual helping someone in need decreased as the number of people present increased, similar to the Ringelmann effect, though the probability that someone would help continued to increase. This finding was consistent across a large number of emergency situations, both real and contrived. Latané concluded that the effect was ubiquitous and could be adopted as a parsimonious theoretical construct to explain a great amount of human conduct. Latané's social impact theory was described as the light bulb theory of social influence. Just as the brightness on a surface is a function of the number, wattage, and nearness of light bulbs shining on it, so people are influenced by a group in proportion to the strength, something like status or persuasiveness, immediacy, the opposite of distance, and the number of group members. And it has like an I with a little number. I equals F parentheses SIN. So, and that's supposed to be compared to the image that we showed there. Okay. So, with the emergence of complex dynamical systems, research through the 1980s, Latané began to expand the predictions of social impact theory to show that the behaviors of individuals could be explained in terms of the self-organizing properties of the social system they comprised. As individuals conformed to the norms they perceived as a function of strength, immediacy, and number of people participating, patterns formed that were only apparent from the population level. Clusters of individuals began to believe similarly, and subpopulations diverged from one another. So I always seem to be in the subpopulation group. Latané teamed up with the Polish physicist psychologist Andrzej Nowak and some of his Polish colleagues who had developed a computer package they called the Warsaw Simulation System, or WSS, in 1990. This software allowed the user to adjust parameters and rules applied to a population of binary individuals, similar to cells in a cellular automation, and observe their effect in terms of which states the individuals settled into. A WSS trial programmed the social impact rules progressed until change had stopped. And when this occurred, it was seen that individuals resembled their neighbors, while regions of the population matrix differed from one another. See figure 5.16. So that's this. And you can see the little areas with the lines instead of the eyes, like those are the outliers. And I circled those this morning and I sent it to Jason, Lynn, and Drew. I'm like, those are us. Okay. Okay, so in their 1990 psychological review paper, Nowak, Samaraj, and Latané called this effect polarization and demonstrated that it was very, very similar to effects found in real societies. This finding of polarization was important, as previous social scientists would inevitably gravitate towards homogeneity. Festinger had called it pressure towards uniformity, but Latané had long noted that, in fact, people in societies and even in small groups do not come to agree uniformly about everything. The more common finding was just as Latané's simulation showed. Pockets of agreement formed with differences between them. Social impact theory evolved over the years. Latané calls the current incarnation dynamic social impact theory, and his findings have developed beyond simple polarization. Dynamic social impact theory results, whether in simulations or studies with human subjects, are seen to possess 4 characteristics as described by Latané in numerous publications. These are: number 1, consolidation. The diversity of opinions is reduced as individuals are exposed to a preponderance of majority arguments. Number 2, clustering. People become more similar to their neighbors in social space. Number 3, correlation. Attitudes that were originally independent tend to become associated. Number 4, continuing diversity. Clustering protects minority views from complete consolidation. So I guess that's sort of what this is showing, is like the clustering of the minority views, or the little outholding spots. The dynamic social impact model differs only slightly from those described in previous chapters, depicting germs, bugs, varmints, and widgets. Now we are considering how people come to hold beliefs and even attitudes, and we are not considering the process to be rational or even self-serving. Latané's model is at least approximately consistent with the findings in the field of social psychology and also in sociology, economics, and anthropology. As people interact, they persuade one another of things. They show one another things, how to do things. They impress one another. They copy one another. And the simple, obvious result is that they become more similar. Their experience may be like may be that they are making rational decisions about everything they do, but the observed effect is that they are becoming more like the people they know and interact with. Latannet's simulations demonstrate some important features of collective adaptation, and they move us without much strain towards the idea of swarm intelligence as a human phenomena. Latannet's theorizing is based on a great deal of experimental evidence. Both his own and others, and the effects of strength, immediacy, and number are ubiquitous and easy to confirm. There is not unanimous universal agreement among social psychologists as to the mechanisms by which polarization comes about, and neither is there complete agreement that Latannet's exact formula is correct. But there is agreement, at least, that a nonlinear, monotonic relationship exists between attitudes and beliefs on the one hand and the number of sources and targets of influence on the other. And certainly there is very little disagreement about the finding that people influence one another and in doing so become more similar. So anyway, so I think that that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Yeah, like how social society is constructed. I'm just going to close this out. Yeah, so how the social systems are constructed. And this relates to the map that I want to spend a little bit of time on before I get into the Mondragon piece. So let me see, picture in picture. And let me escape there. And let me bring up the map. Oh, look, it worked. Okay, cool. All right, so, you know, my last big blog post that I made, I was working on sort of unpacking the individuals behind the that crypto skeptic conference and trying to understand how the narrative was being set that would position Web3 and tokenization. And ultimately, I came down to the sense that what was going on was about, you know, they were trying to frame all of the Bitcoin as libertarian, greedy, problematic, and then it was going to swing back towards a more progressive, so-called democratic tokenization, because as they always say, you know, it's not the tool, it's how you use it. And so I think that that's what was happening. And in the course of doing that research, I came across a panel discussion that happened in 2014. And so in blockchain Bitcoin years, 2014 is still relatively early. Now, again, the decentralized ledger technology goes back, you know, well to the 90s. But the blockchain digital identity Web3 space, like 2014, was still very much on the early side. And so I'm going to, so the focus of this, it was called Decent, and this was a program that was initiated in Europe, and it was doing some trial runs on both the use of digital currency, which I have as a placeholder right here, and then also the idea of direct democracy. And we've talked about that before, you know, Jason Sebs and I, around liquid democracy and futarchy and the tokenization and how that's going to work. So those were the two topics, was sort of rebooting. It was called Decent, the event, D and then CENT, Democracy Reboot. European currency in 2014. And I think we can imagine how over the past couple of years, what's come of, you know, the Save Our Democracy and how the polarization has happened sort of on both sides, right? Stolen elections, Save Our Democracy, you know, fascists, you know, fake news, everything is about sort of truth and justice and clarity, but that's about pushing it into the machine so that the machine can do the evaluation. So I just want to take a second to provide a little bit of context in a video clip. This was a clip from Decent, which did many reports between 2015 and 16, touching on issues of social currency and community currencies that are going to be fed into sort of the UBI discussion. And so I'm going to just start that and
Liberation, decision-making, share expertise and knowledge, and then collectively take political decisions, provide inputs for political manifestos, or even provide policy ideas for the city halls to be implemented.
Complementary currency is an instrument, a device, that allows people to steer the value. Imagine a neighborhood So the neighborhood will itself auto-organize to propose certain projects and to activate them. Now, this is usually all voluntary work. And this voluntary work could be retributed in a way so that it could become sustainable, that the most active participants of this sort of process can actually have an incentive. And this incentive could be complementary currency.
The main democratic institutions we have were designed more than 100 years ago: parliaments, parties, manifestos, 4 or 5 yearly elections. And those have been increasingly out of sync with the way we live our lives.
So people took power into their own hands, and they're demanding 21st century political institutions that are open and transparent and can aggregate the power of citizens and collective intelligence of citizens to shape better politics which are meaningful to them.
They're free and publicly available online. You can access them from the Decent Tools website. All users need to do is download the tools and follow the instructions.
All right, so hopefully that you kind of get a sense of what that is about. Yeah, so they want to give...
Hi everyone, Mark Barden here
sorry.
at Sandy Hook Promise.
Sorry, so they want to give you some tools, right? Some tools for your democracy, some tools to steer your society, some tools to steer your neighborhood with various like reward systems to reward you for volunteering, because ultimately the plan is that you're not going to actually have paid work and that everyone is going to sort of volunteer for script. And that's one of the blog posts I talked about previously. But so that's what Dissent is about. And the very sort of this one of the women in the video, her name is Francesca Bria. Francesca Bria initially worked for Nesta, which was the host of this event. Nesta is in the UK. It was founded in 1998. And, you know, I'll just sort of go broadly around some of the issues that they focused on. I knew about Nesta when I first started my education work through this gentleman. His name is... let me see, Jeff Mulgan. Where did Jeff? Yeah, here's Jeff Mulgan up here, the big blue circle. So Jeff Mulgan was the initial director of Nesta. He had come from something called the Young Foundation, and this Young Foundation was named after Michael Young. And Michael Young in the UK was the father of social entrepreneurship, and essentially he was the architect of sort of the post-World War II labor platform, created the NHS, did a lot of social programs, but you know, some complexities there with setting up this sort of planned weaponized social safety net program. So Mulgan came from the Young Foundation, and he also did a lot of work, and this is where I found him, in the NYU Gov Lab, and you know, they were also involved in a future of democracy working group. And if you've listened to some of my other research, you know that really the future of quote unquote democracy is that you have tokens and so-called radical participatory voting, but everyone's supposed to vote on everything, and clearly people won't have time to do that, and they won't have the knowledge base to do that. So ultimately the goal is that the pile of tokens you're supposed to use to participate as a good digital citizen, you're supposed to hand over to an AI autonomous agent. And that is being sort of devised now by Nesta through reports like combining crowds and machines. This is an image of combining crowds and machines, and this was from 2020. And so they're talking about digital democracy and how to improve group decision making. And so this is all about the swarm intelligence efforts, is to get this collaboration and then to get it into the machine and to use it for data analytics. And so it's quite interesting. They're talking about this agent-based decision making and agent-based government. There were a number of pilot programs. This one was with the Artificial Intelligence Lab at the universities in Brussels and in Lisbon. Portugal is a big center for a lot of this research. And so they're developing agents for all of these diverse people to do their citizen participation. And I'll just read this little section about what is an autonomous agent. It says, autonomous agents are software programs that can act autonomously on our behalf. They are able to respond to states and events in their environment, independent from direct instruction by a human being. Agent software can range from simple programs composed of a small number of rules to large and complex systems. When individual agents react to their local environment and other agents, they produce emergent collective behavior. So we're supposed to hand stuff over to the intelligent agents to do this cooperation. And they're writing these reports saying that the agents do it better than people. Here's another quote. The researchers found that cooperation increased when people delegated responsibility for making a decision to autonomous agents. In the experiment, each participant chose one of several autonomous agents that either acted in the interest of the group or in the interest of the individual. Previous research had shown that people, when delegating to other humans, tend to choose those who act more selfishly. In contrast, observations throughout the experiment suggested that people who delegate their decisions to agents, that those agents benefit the collective. So that's the goal, is that they're going to sort of encourage us to radically participate through tokenization and then hand over our agency really to software programs. And it's quite fascinating to me because in this report they're actually also talking about different kinds of agents, that there were 5 different types and you were supposed to choose one of these 5 types to play the game in your place. And the agents were customized in different ways. So it's quite overwhelming to sort of see how that all works. So going back to the map, so we've got Nesta. It's not just in the UK or in the EU, it's also here because Jeff Mulligan is connected through the NYU GovLab. And the NYU GovLab, they're involved in many things, many impact areas. They're funded by Omidyar Network, John Arnold, the Hewlett Foundation, the UN, Amazon Web Services, Meta, Brookings, the Knight Foundation. So they've got all of these folks. And then they're working on what's called the Research Network on Opening Governance. And so again, if you think of governance as being governed, is the Kubernetes aspect of it, the opening governance means to sort of open it up to the agents or open it up to the machine and the robots. And so they actually had many conferences in like about 3 or 4 years starting in 2014, where they met in various locations in the US and in London and in Canada to sort of set up this infrastructure of mechanized governance. And so again, this is what I've been trying to emphasize for folks, is that all of this stuff that's happened over the past 2.5, 3 years is really predicated on the institutions that were coming to put this in place. And it's not just a health event, it is a governance event, is a cybernetics event. And so entities like Nesta and Jeff Mulligan and NYU and their GovLab and this Research Network on Opening Governance protocol is central. And these were all of them among the many maps. I had maps of all of these different conferences. And I encourage you, this is available in the map itself, to explore around and see some of the key figures who were involved in these governance plans. Okay, so Nesta, not surprisingly, because they're really after what's inside our hearts and minds, they started off their efforts in 2001 with a program around edtech and gaming in public education. Again, because that's a huge amount of data to be harvested from children and also lifelong learners. They developed productivity indices, and so again, a lot of this is going to be around indexes of authentic happiness and well-being in society, but also linked to productivity. So it's all about the data. Tim Berners-Lee of the World Wide Web Consortium is an affiliate with the program, and he was brought in early in 2008 to talk with them about getting Web3 set up and digital identity. And then they had the government makeover. So they in the UK, they were working on something called creative councils, and it was innovating government. And Michael Bloomberg was a partner in that, Bloomberg Philanthropies. And I wrote a lot early on in the lockdowns about that, about Michael Bloomberg, and that in my opinion, he's not talked about that much, and he's more like that. He's the kind of guy that Bill Gates provides cover for. Like Pierre Omidyar and Michael Bloomberg are the ones that are the bigger players behind the scenes. So besides education, the other area of data mining is healthcare, and they're going to be working on wellness, prescribed wellness, and social prescribing, and self-optimization. So this is all part of the telemedicine wellness protocol. At the same time, they were working on needing useful evidence, so evidence of all of the programs. Of course, it's tied in with the sustainability and the smart cities with the UN. There was a platform that was developed in 2015 called READIE, READIE, that was essentially a program that was funded by Google so for the EU governance, right? Because nobody, what would it be if you didn't have social policy dictated by Google, but they're already working on sort of coordinating digital policy units for the monitoring and care of data for health, money, and smart city navigation. So that's what READY was about in 2015. And then they had a future skills report. So again, aligning, the future skills are that we will behave. That's sort of the plan. That was done through the Oxford Martin School. That was part of Oxford University, but it's named after James Martin, who is one of the key individuals who was long time with IBM in systems theory and became a management consultant. So, they're essentially what they're saying is that the future of work is no work, and it is universal basic income and providing access to your intellectual capacity and your feelings and your social networks through digital platforms in exchange for being able to scrap out a tiny bit of living for your data. So that's sort of the overall function of Nesta. Right now, they are working on something called the collective intelligence through digital tools. And I shared this with a friend who has ties to Scandinavia. This is fairly recent. It just came out in September of 2022. So they're talking about innovating democracy with digital participation. And the partners in this, you can see it's the UK Economic and Social Research Council, which is in the UK, but also Nordforsk. So a lot of these digital public goods are coming out of the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Estonia. So again, innovating democracy, because the new plan for democracy is that we're all online and we all radically participate according to the rules. So this is the sort of the layout. Nesta was the host of this. And then you've got Francesca Bria over here in the digital democracy section. She's important because I wrote about her in this Mondragon post. So when I touch about what's happening in Barcelona with the smart cities, understand that this is embedded in the work that Francesca Bria was doing with Nesta, and then later on as sort of the chief technology officer for the city of Barcelona. And I will say, it was one thing. I'm in Philadelphia, and at the time there was a huge pitch. I can't remember what the gathering was, but everybody was going Barcelona because they were the radical city. They were the rebel cities. It was like a call for the rebel cities, and Barcelona was a rebel city. Only I knew that Barcelona was also in the lead of smart city technology and something called Decode, DECODE, which was a platform for digital identity in 2017. So I had been looking at 2017, like the digital identity space very early on. And I knew that Barcelona was part of that. And I knew that, like, again, once you agree to have a digital identity, a unique identifier tracked through Web3, then you're their commodity. You're their cognitive capital, really. And so one of our city council members at the time who had been active in the education space, like, she got a special invitation to go to the Rebel City presentation. And again, that's the backdrop to the conservative libertarian angle on Bitcoin, is that there's this underlying sort of progressive left radical revolutionary tokenization on the other end of the pendulum that's going to swing back. And they use both sides of those to get what they want. And so Francesca Bria is a key player. This idea of Decode, I'll just pull that up. 2017, this was something that I was already looking at. And this is why I knew when blockchain came online, this was my context, not Bitcoin. It was about digital identity and the data-centric digital economy. Here they're talking about the data-centric digital economy and IoT and sensor networks. But hey, don't worry, because we're going to protect all of your data. And I'm like, well, but I don't actually want to be your commodity. I'd prefer not to actually be your commodity at all. The thing that I find is interesting about Francesca Bria is she married a gentleman who's an academic sort of thought leader. His name is Yevgeny Morozov. And at the time, this is part of my, like development process. You don't know what you don't know till you do. Like you have to get a few hard bumps. I was new to sort of more radical thinking, at least I thought at the time. And I was listening to a lot of, thought leaders around opposition to neoliberalism, which clearly neoliberalism is a problem, but not realizing that these people were being put in a position to control what was said. And so Morozov, he wrote several books in like 2013, 2017 about like solutionism. And he was an early critic of Google before it was cool to critique Google. And, he was out on the whole circuit, but I didn't realize till today when I added him to my map that he was also had affiliations with the New America Society, with Open Society, and he had done fellowships or guest visiting with Stanford and Georgetown. So like how much of a critic can you be if that's the company that you're keeping? And so at one point, even on Twitter, like he had seen the work that I did in 2017 in Seattle, my very first sort of recorded presentation. And he was like, oh, wow, about, what Silicon Valley was planning to do to kids in terms of securitizing children as data assets. And he was like, wow, that I didn't know that. And I was like, yeah, no, really. And then I mentioned to him this decode project, and he got really quiet. And then only later did I realize that, it was his wife that was promoting it, right? So if you're going to control all the things, is you groom the Google critic. You make sure he has a couple of really good books, and then you put him in touch with the woman who's running the digital identity program. Now her specialty is really the built environment. So after Barcelona, so she went from Nesta to Barcelona. Now she's back to Italy, which is I think her home country, and she was put in charge of $1 billion National Innovation Fund. And she's very much about the Green New Deal and the built environment. So again, that you are going to have a global construct that's going to be resonating with your identity, and essentially building that Voronoi crystal. Where is that, right? Like they're going to be building the crystal of you over there. But don't worry, because like maybe you'll get a UBI payment out of it and some tokens, and you can pretend that you're participating. So so Bria was one of the key people at this Descent project. I'll link to the map in the comments afterwards. So I encourage you to poke around and explore, because I do have the source links in all of this stuff. And Descent has many documents here. And they're talking about social digital currency. And so when you heard in the beginning the guy saying like, oh, look, we'll bring the neighborhood all together and you can steer your neighborhood through tokenized online platform participation. Now, I will share like my other life lesson is that, and it even goes for this, right? Because like, who knows how long this is lasting. And, I know that this platform is funded by impact finance folks. So, it's by no means perfect. But I poured like 3 or 4 years of my life into adding data and making some really, really sharp and important maps on this little SIS program. And I didn't really realize, although it probably makes sense, that like the admins on the back end can see everything that you're doing and what you're adding. And that essentially digital platforms, even if they're put out as like civic platforms, is that like somebody's at the back end and it's almost used as like covert intelligence, right? So if you want to steer the community, like you want to give the community a tool that says they can steer the community, and then you want to like watch it and then put it all together and then develop your plan to steer it the way you want to steer it. So, I mean, I think this goes back to, what I was saying with the Swarm Intelligence book and, strength, immediacy, and number. Like once you get all of the intel on the back end through these apps, you can do the own steering. It's like recon. And these people have a 10 or 20 year plan. So like, yeah, maybe they give you a tool that empowers you or makes you feel empowered for 5 years. And then they get all of the data that they need and they leverage that into their simulation model, and then they can flip it, right? So then they totally have your number after that. And so I would just I use caution on like the understanding that whenever you're doing digital work, even if they say that it's secure and it's your digital identity, like someone else is using this data. Like Hewlett Packard and Piero Media are not funding these digital tools, just because they care about us. They're useful. They're useful to the system, and they have a very long game plan. The design of the social currency is really central, and eventually I'm going to have a conversation with Jason about this. This Descent. So Descent is one of these many reports, and if you go on here, you'll be able to. There's at least a dozen, and each of these papers is about 100 pages, and I've only gone through about 5 of them. But it's interesting because they're talking about collective awareness platforms. Citizen engagement. They want you to be a digital citizen. They want you to perform your citizenship in the augmented reality layer. Now, Dyn is the software program that the software company that was doing so-called open, all of this stuff. They talk about being open because they want to give it away because you can't have a limited open air prison. So it really all needs to be open source. And then you can see there's Francesca Bria here. And, they're working on setting up this blockchain social currency with a decent social currency, free coins. They have pilots in Iceland, Spain, Finland, and Italy. So these were all pilots going forth. And you can imagine exactly how the role of this, like this is all bubbling in the background as we're getting ready for, global lockdown crisis mode. They knew that this was all coming. So that's the currency platform. These are the pilots. Now the different pilots, these were things that you could get tokens for. You could get tokens for political engagement, and a lot of that relates to participatory budgeting. And I think some of that is this quadratic voting and the futarchy thing where you are sort of placing your token in bets on things that you think are for the public good, and then you get paid back depending on if that's the right choice later or not. There were tokens to compensate you for volunteering, because again, the idea is that there won't be normally like salary work. Everybody will be an ad hoc gig worker and really essentially forced to volunteer, but they'll give you some sort of tokenized script for that. But at this point, it's being told to be like something very nice. They're incentivizing cultural engagement around the arts and culture communities. And again, I've seen that in Philadelphia, highly, highly captured, still very much captured within sort of the health narrative space. You're not going to really have much art and culture unless it's serving the impact finance interests. And so they want to reinforce that through tokenized participation. And then also you could exchange your tokens to endorse people and endorse their reputation. And so moving forward, through the social currency system, it's only going to get more intense. And I'm not really an active LinkedIn participant, but I think that's sort of clearly how LinkedIn was set up in terms of making recommendations and, upvoting people and lending your social capital to them within that network space. So these are all early examples of this tokenized identity, collective participation. So I mentioned before, so there was a tool. The toolkit they were talking about is this decentralized citizen engagement technology that was done in 2015. And the company that did it was called Dyn.org. Oh, and I forgot to mention, my friend Steffers was looking at the image. Let me see. Oh, I can probably bring it up. Okay. Let's see if it pulls. So they're open source. And she of course, she's really good at looking at the symbolism. And so we were looking at what is this logo here? So they're talking about that they facilitate software for social, political, technical, spatial, linguistic, economic, and numerical projects. And they've been around since 2000. So, quite some time. They redistribute their work free of charge because, again, that's what we need for the open metaverse prison. And so they talk about being a think and do tank. And so, looking at, the baker and the bread and kneading, and you've got a collective dough and then you have the individuals. She noted the hashes on the rolls were, the little loaves were hashing with the blockchain. And the finger sticking out, the sort of Jupiter finger, and even I mentioned yeast programming. So I think it's very interesting to take some time and understand how these folks are representing themselves visually in terms of kneading. And I feel a little bit within the bakery, you've got you make the dough, right? And then you let it rise. And maybe we're sort of a bit in the rising moment. That you know are you sometimes you pound it down and you let it rise a couple of times. And so I feel like they've got the basis of what they want with this the tools, right? They've built these tools that they're in the process of selling to us as liberation. And because if they sell it as the commons, and they try to identify that people might have agency within their communities, like I can see that being a way to thread the needle between conservative and progressive, right? Because you can say, oh, well, do you have conservative family values? Well, sure, you can use your token to reinforce those values. Like, do you have sort of open-minded, whatever, like inclusive values? Sure, you can use your tokens for that. And so they'll tell everyone that they can have their own little space, and it sort of feeds into a bit maybe the anarchist thing. Like, sure, we'll geofence you, and then you can just use your tokens how you want to tokenize them. You can code them however you like and use them however you like. But ultimately, I think it's the AI that wants to know all the stuff, to get all the metadata tagging on the tokenization, and to learn us. And so this comes to Dine's third project. So we've got they worked on Decode, the digital identity. They worked on the citizen engagement tools. And then the third project they got EU funding for was something called Common Fare. Common Fare is the new form of social currency, but essentially it's the new kind of welfare, only they're reimagining it as the commons, and they want to valorize social cooperation. And they give you coins, and these coins are kind of like a universal basic income token. And there are various things that you can do to participate in the community with your coins. You can use them to write stories, which is really creepy. You can use them to comment. You can use them to upgrade someone's reputation, or you can use them to exchange used items. So let me see if this is what this opens up. Yeah. So these are the common coin. These are the deals that you can do. You can reward people's stories. You can acquire secondhand goods. So that's, again, the circular economy. And I'm not necessarily against, reuse and sharing. I mean, I think that's actually a really good thing. But once you do it on blockchain, then everybody's, tracking you and like knowing what you had, and, tracking you for the next time, and, measuring your integrity by the tokens that you're using. You can acquire a service. So this is, again, it's this online bartering, but again, they know every token that is exchanged, that's metadata that's being shared and valorized in the securitized context, or you can donate it to group projects. And essentially, the thing about this common fare that's so upsetting is that they know that they're going to put everyone out of work, and then they talk about it as though it is bottom up help for people, and that people are organizing together to help one another, even though they've wrecked the entire world to do it. And so, okay, so before I get into that, which is the next guy, that Andrea Fumagalli, who's a colleague of Bria's, just look at the incentive to share the stories. So, this is so I'm just going to read this off of the website of Common Fare. Each commoner, so we're all supposed to be commoners, and this is starting to feel a little bit weird after the death of the queen and all of the monarchy stuff. Now we're the commoners again, right? Each commoner has a common share, which is an interactive visual representation of their activity in the commons, right? So that's like a digital twin. It shows you how much you and others have contributed. It unlike other forms of reputation you might find for buying or selling items, it's not based on your ability to provide a service. It's based on how your actions strengthen the community. And so again, someone's programming what that community looks like and how aligned you are to it. And that's why I wanted to read the section about the social impact theory, is that the communities are not all the same, right? And then are we presuming that every community gets programmed, every community gets coded into some sort of metrics? Because that's what it feels like to me. In the common fare approach, the common good is created in all interactions. And sharing stories on the commoners' voices, or commenting on the stories, is how you create this positive action. So I'm just asking, like, what does it mean that they're asking us to share stories, right? To me, this feels a bit voyeuristic. And there was a paper that they wrote about this project in 2019 called Co-Designing for Common Values, Creating Hybrid Spaces to Nurture Autonomous Cooperation. And this included actually, this does talk about the Common Share program, but it's not the same Italian scientists. But this is being spread, like this idea of co-creation and co-designing the values in hybrid spaces. And the hybrid spaces is Web3, is augmented reality, and that is fundamentally is a military project. So this is one of the screenshots I took off of the paper, and it's essentially like a helper to share your story. And it has a prompt. It says, "My story and struggles, a small town on a small island." And so this is like a crutch to tell you how to tell your story. Only you have to realize that this is the new form of welfare, only they're not actually going to give you much. And then they're going to ask you to collaborate together, and they're going to call it bottom up. They're going to call it grassroots, even though they've dispossessed everyone and thrown them to the bottom. And then they're like trying to crawl all over each other to like figure out what to do next. Like BlackRock is setting all of this stuff up. It can't be understood outside of that context. So they're talking about mutual solidarity, and that like it's so good for you to construct your story and use different building blocks. And here you can have a collage. And so it's this symbolism, but to me it feels a lot like trauma porn or poverty porn, because the people who are going to be writing stories in these spaces are not going to be doing well at all. And I'm not sure like how we like who thinks that's okay. It just doesn't feel like that's okay at all. So let me see if I can get this last no. All right, it's not going to let me pull up this last image. All right, well, anyway, yeah, so it's all together. So I feel like this is voyeuristic, and the fact that you would tie tokens to sharing your story, and then they would even dictate how you should share your story, and then pay people based on their reactions to your story, when most of the stories are going to be really sad and depressing and like traumatizing for the person at hand. That this is almost like the AI, like a devilish, demonic AI, like beating you up and then asking you to talk about it, and then sitting on your shoulder while you talk about it and like giggling. I mean, it just seems really upsetting. So within this, they're talking about valorizing social cooperation. So they're creating alternative currencies. They're saying it's community currency. It's about guiding. But they want to add value to social cooperation, which sure, like, yeah, we should help each other. I don't think the Amish need a blockchain ledger to do that, right? Like nobody needs to do a barn. They don't need blockchain tokens to raise a barn or to, set up a pot, dinner program for somebody who has an illness or something like that, or bring baby clothes, have to new moms, like that. All that stuff that social cooperation doesn't need to be on blockchain, but it is because they're trying to conjure this noosphere. And this goes back a little bit to this section up here in the map. Let me close this out. So the host of this, besides Nesta, was a guy. His name was Bernard, and I have a terrible time saying his name. Lietaer, I think. Lietaer, maybe is what Jason said. So Jason knows about him because Jason knows a fair bit about complementary currency, only he didn't know about the blockchain stuff when he got started out. So Bernard Lietaer was the initial, made the introductions for this panel. And he actually was the architect of the euro. And Jason was telling me, he's like, I could never quite figure out like how this fit together, the community currency and the euro guy, because they seem like very different things. But what Lietaer was also trying to do was create something called a parallel currency, or an entire ecology of money to go alongside the fiat money. And so this guy is very powerful. Again, he was the architect of the euro. He's since passed. I think he died in 2019. But he was connected with something called Bancor or B Protocol Foundation, which is a clearinghouse that they're working on to essentially like trade tokens without a fee. So like if you have an end point, like you're at the end of the month and all you have are coffee tokens and you need gas tokens, like there would be some way of exchanging tokens for the tokens that you actually need. So Leotaire was connected to that, and he was, you know, and I think I might actually just show you guys this too. He was working on these multiple currencies, parallel currencies. So when everyone is really focused on the central bank digital currency, central bank digital currency, terrible, terrible. I think it is actually a distraction from the plan, is that there will be some sort of government digital dollar, digital money system. And the plan has always been to have an ecology of money, a diversity of currencies. Like that's what Leotaire was about, was setting all of this up. And so when everyone is yelling at me saying, Allison, blockchain isn't bad, it can be used for good. Look, we can make our own tokens. They knew this. So the entire extreme focus on central bank digital currency as the only threat is forgetting the fact that it's ultimately about using your tokens to get the data to control you in Web3 for the right behavior, and then to feed that through Ocean Protocol to the AI to try to get this noetic consciousness thing. They knew that there were going to be these secondary community currencies and that they were going to ultimately be digital, but I have a feeling most of the people who were uplifting those over the last 10 or 15 years didn't know that they were going to be on a digital ledger. These guys knew that they were going to be on a digital ledger because when I talked about Ian Grigg, like that work with Stornetta and Grigg, that was happening in the early to mid 1990s. So the digital ledger technology was always understood. I'm sure Leotaire knew exactly where it was going with digital, and he was fine. And if you imagine that these multiple currencies can be tagged like metadata, then that's really rich. Like not only can they be programmed as to how you can use them, but they can actually be tagged and in motion. So what I found was really interesting when I started to take this apart a little bit was that briefly, this guy, Will Ruddick, was the head of Bancor's community currency program between 2018 and 2019. Now, his educational background, which is quite interesting, he was ABD, so all but dissertation, from UC Boulder in Colorado in high energy physics. And then after that, he went over to Stanford's, the Stanford Linear Particle Accelerator. And I think he had a stint in the Peace Corps. And then he landed in Switzerland working with something called Community Forge. And the Community Forge program was doing a community. Oh, look, there's the bees. We've got the bees up there. They were working on, let me translate it to English, giving your community a space to grow. It is a nonprofit that designs, develops, and distributes tools around local exchange systems and complementary currencies. So you've got the hexagons, you've got the bees. This organization goes back quite a ways, and they're working in Kenya. And that's actually what our friend Will Ruddick did. So Will Ruddick spent between 2010 and 2013 in Kenya Switzerland, working on community accounting for community currencies for this Kenya model. And then I'm just going to show you the simulation that he did, and this is about social physics and the velocity of money. Now, the organization that he founded, it was in 2009. So, like, actually, he had founded this organization while he was working on the module in Switzerland for Kenya. Is this grassroots economics, the Serafu Network, and it's promoting multi-currency markets in Kenya. So let me just bring this up.
This trick will save you thousands of dollars on high energy bills. Alarmed by gas shortages and high energy costs?
And I'm going to step you through kind of how that works. So in the simulation here, we've got, similar to the last few videos, we've got an external market up in the top right. And then we have some kind of suburb or slum or village here with about 100 traders. And money is coming in on a weekly to monthly basis to workers, and that circulates and pumps back out to the city. But at the same time, what's happened here is that we have several currencies going on in the city, and I want to show you how several currencies can interact with each other and sort of act as one community currency that's more resilient. So first off,
all right, so they've got these several currencies, and I didn't actually have the link here. I should have added it in. But there's actually an example of how this works in Kenya. And they're saying like, oh, here's a woman and she owns a small well and she sells water to her neighbors. And then there is a crisis and nobody has any money. And oh my gosh, what do we do now? And so isn't it great that we have all of these multiple currencies to use in crisis? But we know that the crises are manufactured and precipitated. So when you wonder how someone with an ABD, in high energy physics ends up in Kenya doing social simulation of currencies, like that's how it works. And it's interesting within the local currency space. One of the things I thought was notable is that there's quite a lot of local currencies that you've heard. And I'm not saying that the people involved in local currencies are bad. I'm saying that I don't think they actually understand how the blockchain behavioral mechanism and the mirroring into the digital twins and the sustainable development goals and sort of the cybernetics will emerge once it all goes digital. So like the Ithaca dollars, there was another one called Berkshares. Berkshares came out of this Schumacher Center for New Economics, which goes back to 1980, but it's in the Berkshires, right? It's in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. Well, what happened in Great Barrington, right? So the AIER, conservative economics, like all the Mises libertarian stuff. This guy Schumacher, he was an economist. He promoted the thing that was like small is beautiful, which I always thought was great, right? Like small is beautiful. And later even went to Burma, I think, and became a proponent of Buddhist economics and Catholic mysticism and but the use of technology and all of that. And once we get to that place, we can realize that these folks are working on up here. The woman who's doing Bancor, she organized this virtual economic summit in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in 2019 to celebrate the Bretton Woods Initiative, the 75th anniversary. And that's what set up the IMF and the global finance system. But she reframed it as like very empowering for women. And she had a woman who gave the keynote, Rianne Eisler, who I think is well known in sort of the new age kind of spaces. And she was a futurist she was a child in Vienna. Her family escaped before World War II. But she became a system scientist with her husband, David Elliott Loy, who worked at UCLA in this psychosocial adaptation program around moral evolution. And so the two of them teamed up with Ervin Laszlo, evidently in 1984, for something called a General Evolution Research Group. And so they were working on using chaos theory to order the world. And, I'll just read very quickly from the meeting of this research group, which they called the Darwin Project. And they were saying, Darwin talked about a lot of things, way more things than just like survival of the fittest. Really, he was way more interested in moral behavior and social behavior. So the group with Ervin Laszlo, again, who's a systems theorist, working his, very connected with Pavel Luksha, the transhumanist, working towards, this noetic convergence point. This General Evolution Research Group, it says in 1984, it started with a secret meeting in Budapest, and Laszlo set up the Club of Budapest. In 1984, it was a meeting of scientists from both sides of the Iron Curtain during a critical juncture of the Cold War. Spurred by the mounting threat to our species of rapid nuclear proliferation and overkill, the purpose was to see if it might be possible to use chaos theory, then coming into vogue, to develop a new general theory of evolution that might serve as a roadmap for our species out of the mounting chaos of our times to the reassuring order of a better world. And How does that fit, right? I mean, think about that, right? Do we see any similarities between like a nuclear threat crisis and, oh my goodness, like now we need a new order? Like, how do we leverage this chaos to create the new order? And I think that this is definitely it. So this General Evolution Research Group came in 1984, and it said, Irvin Laszlo and a handful of original co-founders expanded this small research group into 40 scientists in all the major fields. It's multinational, and they have this journal, The World Futures. But yeah, so it was this melding of the minds, East and West, towards this next plan, towards the noosphere. And Rianne Eisler was part of something called the Center for Partnership Studies. I mean, she talked a really good game. She talked about partnership versus domination, and she wrote a book called The Chalice and the Blade, I think, and it was all about sort of social costs and the importance of women in society and all of this stuff. Only now all of that's going to be leveraged because the new valorization is social care, right? All of the stuff that like probably she's written about, Sylvia Federici, like unwaged labor, right? Wages for housework, that sort of thing. All of this unwaged stuff is going to be lumped into one giant volunteerism pool with like, pennies on the dollar wages, or, tied to UBI or basic income. And they're going to say that we've made progress, but in fact, it's a total inversion of all of it. So, I'll just mention too that Bancor is no small potatoes. Tim Draper was announced as one of their advisors in 2017, along with Brock Pierce. So there's sort of a lot of weird stuff with Brock Pierce, but they were both appointed as advisors. Let's see, I guess I was connecting through, the grassroots economics, I think, is still linked. The Bancor is the technology layer for the grassroots economics. And it was referenced. So I was trying to get a handle on if Bancor, like how big of a deal it still was, because sometimes in the internet, you just don't know. Like things can pop up for a little bit of time and then, be the in thing for 6 months or 2 years and then disappear. And so I couldn't actually find a website for it. I found some sort of hub thing, but I didn't have a MetaMask. I don't even know what that is. But I was trying to assess, like, is this still a thing? Because sometimes, again, they do pilots and then they just let them die because they had a time frame that they were going to be there and die, and then use the learnings from those pilots for new projects. But I will say that grassroots economics was featured in a paper that was done this past summer out of the University of Vienna. Now, I've done an infographic in the past where I'm really sort of interested in the connection between sort of wave theory, Vienna, free market economics, psychoanalysis, cybernetics, AI, like esoteric stuff. Like Vienna seems to be a real hub for this, and I kind of pin that on that Ian Griggs flower currency. But the University of Vienna has a very big crypto economics program, and this was the paper that came out this past summer, August, complex systems modeling of community inclusion currencies, and it mentions grassroots economics in here. It's part of a series, and one of the authors, his name is Michael Zargham. Now, Michael Zargham I came across a few months back when I was still on Twitter, and it's interesting to me because his background is as an electrical engineer, and he was trained at Penn. He got his PhD at Penn. His LinkedIn says that he's a complex system scientist and architect, and working specifically on swarm intelligence and algorithmic coordination. So I'm just asking people, like, the money stuff, the blockchain money stuff, the multiple community currencies, the tags, the social currencies, the cognitive capitalism that's coming, it really is about mirroring us into the simulacra world. And I think that there's both very technical aspects to it, and I think there's also esoteric aspects to it. Now, a lot of Zargham's work at Penn was actually underwritten by the U.S. Defense Department. So let me see if I can find, and he did work. So his focus of his master's was on stochastic and optimal control in linear and hybrid systems. And then his PhD was in math. Oh, had stuff related to epidemics, coordinated with Wharton. And it says that his research, this is Zarga, my research was funded through Department of Defense sourced interdisciplinary multi-university research initiatives focused on applying advanced computational and mathematics techniques to systems with human elements. See publications for research details. And so, after that, he's been working on the Common Stack. So that's a key program with block science and cyber physical systems, and is an advisor on many things, visiting researcher in Austria, advising on something called Magic Powered, and that's out of Ukraine, and is a strategic advisor and co-founder at Block Science Labs. And so these figures are really important, and as I keep going back to, this is not Klaus Schwab, right? Like, this doesn't have to have World Economic Forum on it for you to pay attention. It's not ideological. It's simply the structure. This is simply how the system has been built for cybernetics for a very, very, very long time. And we have to acknowledge that. Like, we have to acknowledge the domination culture part of it, and then like how it's presenting today. Because I do think if we could at least have the strength and fortitude to look at it, then we could say, do you see what I see? Does that look good to you? And then we would all say, like, collectively, or at least maybe 9 out of 10 of us, like, no, thank you. We don't want to actually do any of that. So this is sort of the key part with Bancor. I will mention that Leotair did a paper in 2017 on universal basic income and blockchain. So, it was called Unconditional Basic Income Smart Tokens from May 11th, 2017, and the use of complementary currencies and smart contracts. And so, like, it's just ridiculous to me, again, like, if you haven't read my piece about the Crypto Skeptics Conference, like, none of this is coming in. It's sort of like these very elite people in the technical space, in the finance space, somehow forgot that this was a thing, that this was something that we actually needed to be concerned about or have an opinion about, the universal basic income on blockchain. The co-author on that paper was a gentleman named Ari Ben David. And according to his LinkedIn, it's kind of interesting. He's, surprise, surprise, a social entrepreneur, a serial social and business entrepreneur in international business. And he says that he was sort of a key individual in working on financial reform in Israel in 2012, that he initiated the Israeli monetary reform movement. I couldn't find independent confirmation of that, but that's in his LinkedIn profile. And he talks about, like, being an activist for social economic reforms. But interestingly, that one of the last items is that he was a founder and managing director of the Waldorf teacher training in the David Yellin Academic College of Education in Jerusalem. And he's actually the contact for the anthroposophy program in Jerusalem. So, Raul had started to do some work around Steiner, and how this fits in with sort of, I think ultimately will be sort of eco-fascism, linked to some of these systems. But it's quite interesting to see one of these key players connected to universal basic income on blockchain with smart contracts and tokenization, as, teaming up with Leotair to do that, and also having these ties to Waldorf. And I think before I end on this, I'm going to just mention that the woman, Galia Benartzi, she and her brother were among the co-founders of this protocol. A number of the other folks who are working in, like, product development and math, they have ties back to the, like 8200 unit, because I think most high-level tech projects with people who are, in Israel have ties, because that's how they do it. And, they cream the smartest people in math and science, and they train them up and then give them money to start businesses. So she actually grew up, I think her father was an engineer in Palo Alto. So she's from the US, but these have ties to Tel Aviv. And she did an initial currency program with something called the Lev market. And this Lev market was actually a cryptocurrency used by low-income mothers in Israel to like trade those clothes that your kid has outgrown or the old toys and that sort of thing. But they put it on the blockchain, and it was called the Lev Market or Hearts, and they were purple tokens with hearts on them. So you've got the Taurus again. So I think this is all quite interesting, this Bancor piece. And so there's some other parts of the map, but I'm gonna maybe wait on this. Actually, before I start the reading, I'm just gonna remind you about Francesca Bria in Barcelona and do one more person. So Andrea Fumagalli, it was one of the other panelists that day. He is an Italian economist and also focuses on informatics and cognitive biocapitalism and basic income. And so he was very much involved in this common fare program that was being reporting, and this, valorization of social cooperation, and this idea of, again, there's a book that I've been meaning to read. It's not a very enjoyable read, but it's called We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. And it's from 1921, and it's this early techno-totalitarian system. And everybody has a number. You only have privacy like 1 hour a day, and then you're allowed to have sex with the person who's assigned to you. It's this like dead, sexless, optimized technological society. It's even worse than Walden 2 or B.F. Skinner. It's very dry and very mathematical, and it feels like that's what's coming. And then with this cognitive capitalism, with this valorization of social cooperation towards swarm intelligence, right? Towards getting the stuff into the AI, like we're not entitled to actually have any of our own internal thoughts that are just internal to ourselves, to have something that is aside from the collective. And, I come at this from like, a liberal, then left-leaning progressive space. Like I'm coming at this and I think, I worry because even, a number of years ago when I was doing this work and I thought, okay, so it's not liberal, it's left. Is that what it is? And then and Philly has a very fragmented sort of scene, everything from DSA to like anarchist stuff. And like I would go up to people and I would say, are you talking about socialism on blockchain? Is that how you're going to plan it, like in blockchain? And it's, people didn't know how to respond. Like they didn't have any, they couldn't even acknowledge what I was talking about. But I think that the Cybersyn, the Stafford Beer, that this is what's coming next with on the progressive left. You've got the libertarian anarcho-capitalists, and then you have the leftist social programs. And later I'll spend a bit of time going into this community currency in Brazil that came in under Lula. But it's very worrying that essentially what they're going to say is like, that your identity, your inner self, your inner thoughts, your soul is actually part of the collective, and we're entitled to it. We're entitled to your stories and in turn of your access. And so, okay, so we've got Fumagalli. He is Italian. He collaborates with Francesca Bria. He's also part of something called the it's way over here. He and this guy, Felix Martin, who's a bond trader, they're both part of something called the Institute for New Economic Thinking that was started by George Soros and Open Society after the last crash to say, oh, we need a new way. We need to fix this. But then the fix is clearly going to be cognitive capitalism. That's the fix that is planned. So the bond trader and the militant researcher economist are both on the same team. And this INET group also has a lot of people who are involved in the tokenization of children through their education finance. Fumagalli wrote a book in 2019 called Cognitive Capitalism, Welfare and Labor, the Common Fare Hypothesis. So they're definitely going to be pushing this hard. Again, the last 2 years of lockdowns has really, really created the conditions to pave the way for this. In addition to teaching at Pavia, University of Pavia, he's at Bologna in informatics and is the founder of Basic Income Network in Italy, and is on the executive committee of something called Basic Income Earth Network. And I was a bit surprised to find out that goes all the way back to 1984, this Basic Income Earth Network. 1984, I mean, maybe you're going all the way back to Buckminster Fuller and Milton Friedman and this idea of the world game and the negative taxes, but it's all being framed around the commons. You're a commoner, we're protecting the commons, everything goes into the collective. Eleanor Ostrom is one of the people who's cited often. She's one of the few female Nobel Prize winning economists, and her whole focus was on how the commons would be governed. And I think the plan is to govern the commons with tokens, and we are supposed to hand our tokens over to the robots, right, or to the software agents. For that is the plan. I think I'm going to wait on this part. So there we go for mapping. And I'm so excited that this actually seemed to work tonight because I wasn't sure. I've just been experimenting to see if we could get this. So now I'm going to go back to Mondragon, and let me see if I can do it like this. Oh, cool. Okay. So this is my blog post. The last time I read the first in the refugee series, and this is sort of embedded within the Synthetic Pretenders series that I have, and it got very long, and I have more parts planned, but then I just the wind blew out of my sails. So I do hope to get back to it, but there was about a 50-page paper I wrote that was specific to how the cyber-physical environment and digital identity impact finance hinges on sort of refugee communities, and what's in this series, this section, the second piece, actually goes into quite a bit of detail about Barcelona, which is quite fascinating. That's why I really wanted to hit on looking over the map and looking at Francesca Bria and her participation in all of this, again, bouncing from London and Nesta to Barcelona and then back to Italy and their innovation fund. And again, of course, within the context of all of this is the fact that, the Vatican has pulled all of its money back in, and, we'll see what's coming next. Okay, so this is called Mondragon, Focolare, and Inclusive Capitalism, Synthetic Pretenders, Part 15b. And it has a featured image here of Pope John Paul II with Chiara Lubitsch, and she was the founder of what's called the Focolare ecumenical movement. And so faith-based institutions are really central because what's coming is going to be called a moral economy, and an economy of morality. And so all of the different faiths around the world, Leotaire did a whole thing around impact, currencies for Sharia compliant. So, all of the major world religions are going to be together, and they're going to come together through ecumenicalism. And again, I'm not someone who's dictating anybody's religion. I say do your faith practice authentically, hold your institutions accountable for things they may be involved with that are actually unethical, and then follow your own path and have your own relationship with God. I mean, that's what it feels like to me, and that we need all of us who have that authentic, who have a connection to a faith practice, to do that earnestly, because what's coming seems like really the antithesis of all of that, and it's going to be coming in the name of peace and justice and collaboration. Only it's false. It's false. That's what's being put together. Okay, so this is the second post. Now I'm reading the post here. This is the second post referencing refugee labor, charter cities, faith communities, cooperatives, and tokenizations. You can read it in full here, and I have a PDF link. And let me see if I can do this. Let me see. Okay, yes, here. So there, I just put the link in if anybody wants to follow along or save the PDF for later, because it's sometimes easier to read that way, because it's about 50 pages. Actually, it's about 100 pages with all of the images in there. Okay, so for the past decade, the idea of applying collective ownership and governance principles to digital platforms has gained momentum, notably in the quote-unquote rebel ultra-smart city of Barcelona, where Francesca Bria, formerly of Nesta, vigorously promoted the digital sovereignty of citizens through cooperative ownership of data. In this scenario, the quote-unquote renegade left is used as a counterweight to establishment neoliberalism, shoring up the technological imperative to dominate the natural world into synthetic submission. They promise that theirs will be the kinder, gentler AI that really, really cares about us and about solving inequality in a Fabian socialist / libertarian paternalistic kind of way. Illustrative of this mentality is a May 2022 article featuring the Rebel City touting adoption by their urban innovation lab of coastal drone surveillance as a tool to improve management of public space. Sure, you can go to the beach presuming you agree to follow an ever-changing list of rules. We're supposed to feel reassured by the fact that the data is supposed to be anonymized, but I don't think people will forget, however, the use of drones to police social distancing over the past few years. And again, I think the drones are really central in working on swarm intelligence, because even though they're in the material world, like we're talking about managing agents collectively in simulations is a lot easier than in the real world. If you're managing drones, they're mostly in the air, and if they're in an area that's open like a shoreline, they're not going to run into as many things. So they're a lot easier than humanoid robots that are supposed to walk. If they're flying, they're easier to manage, and I think that's why a lot of the early research has gone into drone development, especially because they're relatively inexpensive and they can be used collectively. So they're working on getting all of the systems in place for the drones. Okay, so then I have an image and it says drones flying over Catalonia's beaches to enforce social distancing as COVID rates soar. So that's the article, the screenshot I included. The following is taken from a paper called Building Digital Cities from the Ground Up, based around data sovereignty and participatory democracy, the case of Barcelona. And it was prepared by Francesca Bria in 2019 when she was the Chief Technology Officer of the city, having come from London, where digital identity and social innovation were her areas of expertise. Okay, so this is from the report. Quote, they can run smart, data-intensive, algorithmic public transportation, housing, health, and education, all based on a logic of solidarity, social cooperation, and collective rights. Okay, so imagine how that gets coded, right? Barcelona is actively forging alternative municipal alliances of rebel cities, becoming a key site of struggles to fight climate change, build more livable and just cities, and regain technological sovereignty. Okay, so I don't know if you remember seeing that clip a while back of like Ocasio-Cortez's like watercolor thing of this beautiful city, but that's the thing they're talking about, only they're not saying it runs on tokens with drones. Barcelona's digital city efforts have centered on opening up governance through participatory processes and greater transparency. At the core of Barcelona's model is a large-scale participatory experiment powered by a digital participatory platform, Decidim, We Decide in Catalan, which enables citizens to shape government policies by suggesting ideas, debating them, and voting on them. Decidim taps into the collective intelligence of citizens to create policies that better respond to their needs. Okay, so Decidim is a giant data grab, right? It's like every single interaction they want it to get all of that data for training their data sets. We focused on aligning the technology with the city's core policy objectives, selecting through a large-scale participatory democracy process. In the case of Barcelona, affordable housing, healthcare for all, sustainable mobility, energy transition, increased public space, and the fight against climate change are top priorities. And they just so happen to all be impact investment sectors too, right? Now the renewable energy operator is experimenting with distributed energy grid technology and with applications that allow citizens to own their energy consumption data. And that's interesting, that thing. So the distributed grid energy technology, that's going to be blockchain or some kind of distributed ledger system. And I think, again, that's why things were so bad. And one of the reasons in Puerto Rico after the hurricane with the not renewing their electrical grid, because they wanted to use them for the next this next distributed technology. I mean, that's what they were trying to get off the ground. And then I think if you imagine that somehow alternative decentralized energy systems like nuclear, right? The modular nuclear is probably going to be a part of that. Like, will the piezoelectric energy harvest be a part of that? And then if you're owning your own energy consumption data, again, that's part of your digital twin profile, and that's going to be part of the rating system, right? But I mean, the citizens owning their energy consumption, like, what about like the defense departments or the data centers, or like what are these other things that might be giant data hogs that aren't being considered, right? It's always like, oh, we're going to fix climate change if we all go to paper straws or something like that. Like, they're not actually keying in on the key problems. Okay, so this goes back to the paper. The use of an open sensor city infrastructure called Centilo and a big data analytics makes it possible to define and predict better public mobility policies and measure the urban impact of evidence-based policymaking. So, of course, evidence-based policymaking is social impact finance, and they've got, a sensing environment. That's the cyber-physical environment. Now, for instance, the municipality has a large contract with Vodafone by which every month the company is obliged to give back machine-readable data to City Hall while also making sure they encrypt the data and preserve citizen privacy. So, again, I'm just still not totally convinced of the privacy part because ultimately they're going to actually ask us to account for our data in order to get the UBI. So even if it's anonymized, it's still ours and it's still part of us, even if our name isn't specifically attached. Alternative models of service provision are being fostered via the creation of special funds for platform cooperatives and digital social innovation supported by an EU initiative that has channeled 660 million euros in the last few years towards experimenting with next generation digital platforms that work for the public interest. Okay, so this is their pushback against the gig economy and the online outsourcing is that they, they're going to frame it as a cooperative, right? A platform cooperative, and I think we need to be aware of that framing. Barcelona leads a network of rebel cities, fearless cities, that is adopting tools and experiments in open democracy and data protection. The first conference was hosted in the city last year, bringing together more than 180 cities from 40 countries and 5 continents. Yeah, so that's probably where my city council person was at their Fearless Cities conference, right? Fearless, there's no fear because everything is on blockchain and with the AI, right? So you're not allowed to be afraid. Barcelona is the coordinator of the Decode project, the biggest EU effort to establish a framework for data sovereignty, aiming to develop open source, decentralized, privacy-enhancing rights, preserving technologies for citizens to decide what kind of data they want to keep private, what data they want to share, with whom, and on what terms. This proposes a new social pact, a new deal on data we hope will become a reality in many cities across the world. And so I'm just going to take a second here. I just want to go back to the map and just pull up Decode for a second. So there we've got Bria, right, and the Barcelona and the Decode. And I just want to show you who's part of it. Does it have the resources, news, project? Who are we? The project? What is Decode? Yeah, so who are the people? Wait a minute. Our progress timeline. I'm trying to see like they used to have who was in charge because it wasn't just Barcelona. It was Amsterdam and others. Isn't that interesting? They don't seem to actually say who's doing it, the pilots. Okay, maybe it's in the pilots. Sorry for this. I should be. Okay, so these are the pilot projects with Decode. Oh, there it goes. Read more. Okay, so we've got Barcelona, right? The digital democracy and the data commons, and I would like to see a whole lot more conversation, right, about digital democracy. I was trying to have a conversation with my husband this morning about it, and he's very checked out on all the stuff I work on, and I'm like, okay, guys, we're supposed to be. This is our democracy under threat, right? And yeah, I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you how you should think about who to vote for. Because ultimately, within the next 5 to 10 years, this whole infrastructure is going to supersede that. So do what you have to do for now. But if we're not actually talking about this, we're not being responsible to the people who are coming up behind. Because I feel like we can't actually, whether you're talking stolen elections or whether you're talking saving the republic or what have you, whatever polarized side you're on, that polarization is being used to leverage us towards digital democracy and data commons and citizen science as, us as digital netizens. So that's coming. So Barcelona, then in Amsterdam. Oh, I thought it was more than Amsterdam. Well, I guess it's no surprise because the Netherlands, as Leo has been looking into with a rise, they're just trying to log every darn thing that there is. So yeah, so this is underway, but this was my entry point to blockchain, was the identity space, not the Bitcoin space. Okay, so I'm going back. Okay, let's see. Okay, so in addition to the city of Barcelona, Decode's partners include Arduino, which is an advanced cyber-physical infrastructure that's based in New York, ThoughtWorks, which is Chicago headquartered agile software consulting, and it was acquired by Ronald Cohen's Apex Partners in 2017. And Ronald Cohen is sort of the father of impact bonds, social impact bonds. Nesta, which is a UK social innovation lab. Thingful, which is a search engine for IoT connected devices in a geography, and it's based in London. The University College London Information Security and Research Group, which is end-to-end cryptography for social uses. And University College London was part of my last podcast. The Economic Center of the Sorbonne. Dribia, a geolocation data analytics program in Barcelona. Euracat, Industrial Technology R&D Center with Biotech in Catalonia. The Open University of Catalonia, which is their human-computer interaction and digital commoning. The Nexus Center for Internet and Society in Turin. Amsterdam, the other pilot city. Dyn, which I've talked about, this open source software foundry based in the Netherlands. The Privacy and Identity Lab at Radboud University in Nijmegen, Netherlands. And the WAG Future Lab, promoting a Planet B proposal for decentralized tech in Amsterdam. The framework that Decode lays out is aligned with assertions of data dignity and plural property being promoted by Radical Exchange developers of soulbound tokens. Yeah, so the data dignity and the plural property is important. So Bria has since left Barcelona to head the Italian National Innovation Fund and consult with the UN Habitat on smart cities. They mean for us to become sovereign citizens of the planetary computer. And they are giving us two options. Either one, allow tech giants to control our data, or two, agree to become data commodities inhabiting a world of total surveillance. Both models are grounded in digital empire and conquest of natural systems. There are other options that would not require us to submit ourselves to the AI gods, and we need to be advocating for them now. With all the talk of social credit scoring, we should remember that vulnerable populations, including children, are on the front lines of the social impact data commodities game. Sorry. With a deft sleight of hand, platform cooperative refugees could wind up contingent remote labor, even as they are publicly lauded as empowered token holders with a stake in the brutal fiction that is 21st century data economy. That is what the impact economy looks like. So don't get caught up in their manipulative, interactive digital storytelling. Unfortunately, most of us are pretty easy to fool. We don't want to face the horror that we may all end up living in a cross between Black Mirror's Nosedive episode and Ira Levin's Stepford Wives. And then I have a screenshot here that is from 2016 that talks about bringing platform co-ops to rebel cities. And it was with this guy, Trevor Scholes. But this platform cooperative is really important. So Mondragon, Focolare, and Capitalism's Catholic Makeover. So currently one of the largest companies in Spain, Mondragon Corporation, started out in the 1950s as an effort of Catholic social teaching by Father Jose Maria Arizmendiarratia, who combined technical education with a worker-centered model that remade the metalworking industry that had been the community's economic engine since the Middle Ages. Laminates was one of their products, sheet metal, which is interesting given the ties to Lamina One and Lamins that I wrote about in a previous piece. The priest's legacy is one of a vanguard entrepreneur who sought to go beyond a mercantile and economic society dedicated to satisfying the private interests of its investors to spearhead a complex social movement based on the principles of self-management, subordination of capital to labor, and Christian communitarian ethics, establishing a cooperative model that by the 1950s included real estate, sports, educational, cultural, and health services. Sociologist C. George Benello includes a chapter on Mondragon in his 1993 book, From the Ground Up, Essays on Grassroots and Workplace Democracy. And I would say, like, you should think about the fact that this common fare, they're always talking about ground up organizing and the grassroots economies, right? And so I think that's a co-optation of like authentic grassroots efforts that are there being repositioned. That book traces Mondragon's influence to the creation of the cooperative cabinet post in Mitterrand's France, projects with the Welsh Trade Council in England, projects with the Welsh Trade Council, England's job ownership movement, and the establishment of progressive Catholic worker organizations in Detroit, Milwaukee, and Boston. Okay, and so then I have a screenshot, and it says that the United Nations dedicated 2012 as the International Year of Cooperatives. And it's a screenshot of the UN page, and it's promoting the cooperatives. It says they are based on the values of self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. So, you know, I might take a minute here just to play one other clip. So listen, so they're talking about what they're trying to get, your values. So they want to encode the values. There's the self-help, which appeals to the libertarian side, self-help and self-responsibility. But then equality, equity, and solidarity appeals to the left. So they're threading the needle between conservative and progressive. And they're talking about, everybody doing this work. And so one of the other people who was on this panel was Stacey Herbert. Now, Stacey Herbert and Max Kaiser are the key ugly Americans in the El Salvador Bitcoin space, right? And I didn't really know much about them until I was adding them to the map. Evidently, Max Kaiser was a stand-up comedian who then went into like television production and this Hollywood stock market or something. It's very odd. And then, the two of them were producing projects for RT and BBC. So like they have really no like formal connection to this stuff other than being celebrities for being orange pill podcast Bitcoin promoters. But in this, so Stacey Herbert, I don't even know why she was invited to be on this panel. Like she hadn't become a thing really in 2014 yet. It was still relatively early that she and Max Kaiser were doing their report for RT. And, but I want you to listen to this. This is actually like a 4-minute pitch. And she was the first panelist. And essentially, if you listen to her, she talks about the importance of the economic structure, not so much Bitcoin, but the economic structure herself. She ends it at the end saying that like, actually this is in a creation phase with many things evolving, but ultimately she thinks that the blockchain as a system is the most important. And in the middle, she talks about this like monkey token project where the monkeys are in cages and are treated unequally. But at the end of that, she points out, she's like, but in in this blockchain world, if you're the monkey that works hard enough to earn the grape, you're going to get this grape reward. You're going to get the reward that you earned, as opposed to the game being rigged by the big banks. And so essentially, this whole monkey experiment is asking us to live within the smart contract machine. So if you listen to her, like she's really not the Bitcoin lady so much at that point. I mean, I'm sure she was a little bit, but what she's really trying to tell the audience is what she thinks is important is this idea of experimentation in cryptocurrency, and that the blockchain governance system is above all the most important piece.
In Bitcoin is not so much about the currency aspect of it, but the economic institution aspect of the blockchain and a fraud-free system. Now, I wanted to show you a video, but apparently it didn't arrive. And that is, but all of you may have seen it. It's about, it was Franz de Waal played it at his TED Talk. And this is the monkey fairness experiment. I don't know if anybody saw that. And it's a perfect analogy, I think, for what is going on in our financial system. For those who don't know, you have two monkeys side by side in two cages. They can see each other. The first monkey, the task is they have to give a rock in their cage to the researcher. The researcher gives the first monkey a cucumber. The monkey's happy, eats the cucumber. The monkey next door, he sees, does the same thing, gives the rock to the researcher. The researcher gives monkey number 2 a grape. monkey number one starts slamming the ground saying, what, why are you doing this? And so the researcher comes back to him, looks for the rock. First, he takes the rock, rubs it against the wall, thinks he's doing something wrong. Did he do something wrong to fail to get the grape? Gives her the rock, and she gives him a cucumber. He's like, no, throws the cucumber at her, and then monkey number two does the same thing, gets a grape. What happens to monkey number one? He responds like what you see in Athens or Cairo or the Indignados in Spain. If you had a group of these monkeys in there, they would freak out and a revolution would happen. So I think that's what we've seen since this financial crisis is a certain group of people have been getting grapes while everybody else gets cucumbers. And the exciting thing for me about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is that we have the opportunity to get rid of that, to just, it's like an online republic for a financial system. The rules and parameters are the same for everybody. You get a grape if you are worth the grape, if you work hard enough for the grape. It's not just because some central banker decides to print up $700 billion and give it to you because you're too big to fail. So that's where we, that's my interest at the moment. And in terms of where we're going, right now what I see, I mean, for 2 years we talked about Bitcoin. We were the only television news covering it. Nobody else was doing it. There would be a few little snarky pieces, you know, about the freaks and Bitcoin on the mainstream. And then last year in February, I forget which regulatory authority in the US, but they issued some sort of statement about it. And suddenly, the mainstream media in the US covered it. And you remember the price went bonkers. It had been for years, you know, between $2 and $20, and then suddenly it went up to $150, and then it crashed. But they're obsessed with the currency aspect of it, the money, the price. They constantly just talk about the price. So every single time it rises rapidly, or every time it collapses rapidly, they talk about it. Now, it's obviously a Ponzi scheme. Never once do you ever hear them talk about the blockchain. They don't even see that part of it, which is way more interesting than the currency aspect. I first came to it because of the currency. I thought it was a virtual currency, and my partner Max, who has not yet trolled me out there, he has a patent on a virtual currency, and I thought it was a virtual currency. So, but now I think it's kind of like the pre-Cambrian sort of explosion time. You see all sorts of crazy stuff, sovereign currencies, like somebody has created Aurora coin for Iceland, or there's the Lakota currency. You know, during the pre-Cambrian period, you know, you had creatures with 5 eyeballs, and some with 7, some with 2, and so, you know, finally 2 worked, and now every creature has 2 eyeballs pretty much. I think we don't know, in 2 years' time it could look radically different from what it is now, but there are certain elements, and I think the blockchain is one of them, that will survive whatever we go into the next system.
So I think that that's kind of interesting to me, is this idea that she knew that it was about blockchain. And so that it's so over the top now about, you know what, I'm gonna try for a second. I see that somebody had a question about the Steiner stuff, and I'm gonna see if it comes up. So the RSF social finance, it's actually really interesting, and I would encourage, if you're someone who's sort of aligned with the more the anthroposophy side of things, that the Rudolf Steiner Foundation, like, they're deeply into social investment. And I probably need to like set up and have a whole separate presentation about this. But there's a bit of money that got left over from the 30s or 40s, and it sat around until the 80s. And then at some point, a couple people in like upstate New York were like, hey, we should do something with that money. And then they got a little bit more money. And then like the son of one of these guys took the money to Silicon Valley, and then it became a giant slush fund for impact finance. And so, you know, it's interesting to sort of imagine, you know, what's coming with this social investment fund. And I have a bit more detail that I haven't put together tonight, but like, when I'm looking at what's going on with the what's his name, Ben David or whatever, let me see, and his connection to anthroposophy, I do wonder about the Rudolf Steiner. Yeah, it was Eri Ben David, who was the Anthroposophical Society in Jerusalem. What's going on with the Rudolf Steiner Foundation, because it does seem to be a giant slush fund for Silicon Valley and impact finance. And if so, like people who are connected more with the Waldorf schools that Steiner promoted, like they were doing, even though they're supposedly against technology, I think that maybe is shifting, I've heard a bit, and they were definitely all about masking and everything the children throughout. So they were, it was, as with many things in the alternative community during that time, seemed inconsistent with the overall principles. So let me just switch over to going back. So hopefully that makes sense. But if you look at the cooperatives, just think about what she said. Like, so she's uplifting the story about the two monkeys in the cages, and they're treated differently and for the same activity. And some get cucumbers and some get grapes. And that won't it be great, because in the new blockchain world, essentially we'll be living under conditions where if you've earned a grape, that's the equity and solidarity, or the self-help. Like if you've earned the grape, the machine will give you the grape. But ultimately, I think that we're all still in animals in the cages, and it may be the Sophia the robot is on the outside, handing us the snacks. Okay, so the online Christian newsletter Aletheia published a quote, Mondragon and the other father, Jose Maria. The article opened contrasting this guy's name is so hard, Arizmendiarrietia with Saint Jose Maria Escriva, who founded Opus Dei, an influential and secretive fraternity of Catholic lay people and affiliated priests. Opus Dei began in 1928 and expanded to include the Priestly Society of the Holy Cross in 1943. And that was the same year that Mondragon Technical College was started. Arizmendiarrietia was 17 when Escriva's 17 years Escriva's junior, though the careers of the two Spanish priests coincided for 3 decades. Elias Krim, author of the piece, sought to unite the distinct outlooks of the two men, one conservative and the other socially progressive, though within the existing capitalist model, under the umbrella of the Focolare movement. And that's Focolare, Focolare movement. Focolare translates to hearth or fireside in English and has the goal of universal Christian brotherhood. It was started by Chiara Lubich, a teacher from Trent, northern Italy, in 1943. The group was first acknowledged by Pope Paul VIII, the Good Pope, as the work of Mary. And during his period of leadership, Paul VIII modernized the church, dialogued with communist nations and Eastern Orthodox churches, increased the number of bishops to 85, and appointed representatives from Africa, Japan, and the Philippines. He also called the Second Vatican Council in 1962. Additional approvals were given to Focolare by his successor, Pope Paul VI. The movement spread to over 180 countries and now has over 2 million practitioners and 25 so-called little towns. Among them is Marianopolis Luminosa in Hyde Park, New York, where the New City Press is based. It is one of 20 Focolare affiliated publishers. That press has a new book series out titled Magenta, and it is meant to build bridges and address polarization. Focolare embodies Evangelii Gaudium, a new era of evangelization by lay people. There is a Center for Evangelii Gaudium at the University Institute Sophia, which became the successor of the Abba School in 2007. Lubich created the Abba School in 1990 with support from the Pontifical Council for the Laity to promote charism, spiritual gift of theological unity and cultural potentiality. The organization maintains an ecumenical outlook with an emphasis on Marian devotion. Volunteers of God, organized at a parish level, take vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. Since 1963, its base of operations has been Rocca di Papa outside of Rome. Lubitsch created 3 Gen programs for youth and then combined them as New Humanity in 1966, followed by a New Families movement the following year. While undertaking quote-unquote solidarity work in Poland in the late 1970s, Focolare members met in secret with Archbishop Karol Wojtyla, who was so impressed with Chiara's writings that he invited her to meet with him shortly after he became Pope. The following excerpt is taken from the Focolare website. And this is the excerpt. Before his election to pontificate, Karol Wojtyla only knew Chiara through her writings. As soon as he became Pope, he wanted to meet her. I was visiting Rome in that period, and I received a phone call from the Pope's secretary, Stanislaw Dziwick, who I knew very well, and he told me that the Holy Father wanted to invite Chiara and I to his Mass the next day at 7. Chiara, Eli Focolare, and I left very early in the morning. As you can imagine, we were very excited. When we arrived, we saw that the platforms for the conclave were still in place, and so we had to take a longer path to get to the Pope's apartment. That Mass in the Pope's private chapel is still vivid in my soul. There was such a special atmosphere of recollection, a presence of God. Along with the Pope, Don Stanislaw, and the 3 of us, there were only 2 or 3 Polish sisters. After the Mass, the Holy Father greeted Chiara. I still remember what with high regard and great love he addressed her. He asked if he could have a map showing the different places where the movement was present, so that I can know where to lean on, he said. And that was the beginning of a special friendship, of an ever stronger unity between 2 people called on by God to do great works, 2 people to whom God gave 2 gifts for the church and for all of humanity. Okay, so it's important to understand this, these vows, these small towns, and the vows of, chastity, poverty, and obedience, and think about how that fits in with what I'm talking about with this idea of social currency, volunteerism, and dispossession and cognitive capitalism. I think that that's really important. And the fact that the Vatican has had 3 impact conferences connected with Ronald Cohen and the Omidyar network and big tech in Silicon Valley. And imagine that these little Focolare tiny villages would become sort of petri dishes for swarm intelligence and tokenized social currency. The fact that Focolare's global footprint expanded significantly under the protective wing of Pope John Paul II is notable. During his first decade as Pope, the Catholic Church played an influential role in Polish politics, as defined by Lech Walesa's Solidarity trade union social movement. In retrospect, what was portrayed as a grassroots worker movement had the involvement of U.S. interests through the AFL-CIO and the CIA, as well as clergy whose goals were to advance a nationalist conservatism. In the end, Poland's economy was open just in time to be eviscerated by neoliberalism and globalization. The government repression workers sought to escape simply transformed into capitalist disciplining, leaving many Poles in poverty during the closing years of the 20th century. More market shaping for a post-human economic framework where benefit corporations can pretend to care about people while milking them for poverty compliance data to run the information economy. We now see solidarity economy messaging and a focus on platform cooperatives, setting the stage for social impact finance, stakeholder capitalism, and cybernetic circular economies. In the May 2020 report below, funded by Klaus Schwab's foundation, or the Schwab Foundation, in partnership with the World Economic Forum, solidarity economy was used interchangeably with social economy throughout. And then there's a screenshot from the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship with the World Economic Forum, and it's a woman at a sewing machine. She looks South Asian, and it says, "Unlocking the social economy towards an inclusive and resilient society. Impact Insight Report, May of 2022, in collaboration with Deloitte." And again, all of the big accounting agencies are part of that. So I find it very odd that this teacher from a rural area, Chiara Lubitsch, was catapulted to such prominence after World War II, eventually gaining audiences with religious leaders from around the world, including Michael Ramsey, Archbishop of Canterbury, Athenagoras I of Constantinople, who helped write the Catholic Orthodox Joint Declaration of 1965. And if you've watched my my intention setting at Asbury Park in Ocean Grove, you'll remember me talking some about Athenagoras and how odd it is that his bust is on the Asbury Park, New Jersey boardwalk. So I think he's quite an important figure of bringing, again, the Eastern Orthodox Church back in alignment with the Vatican for this new era of the noosphere. Bishop Klaus Hemmerle, Bishop of Aachen, Germany. Nikkyo Niwano, founder of the Buddhist lay movement. Risho Kosei Kai, and the Supreme Patriarch of Thai Buddhism, Somdet Pra Nyan Samvara. And so she gave presentations all over the world, from the United Nations to the Malcolm X Mosque. And at a conference for the 50th anniversary of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, France, she presented a market-based society, democracy, and solidarity. So again, they've got market-based society, which is more libertarian, and solidarity, which is more progressive. They may speak of love, unity, and harmony, but it is actually about leveraging markets to attain a global heart-mind synthesis. Those in power believe will lead to a new phase of biodigital evolution and the emergence of a world brain. There are critics. It is said of the Focolare adherents that Focolare adherents are expected to exhibit self-denial and center themselves almost exclusively to the words and ideas of Chiara Lubich. There was child sexual abuse. Certain Catholics were also skeptical of the influence of Focolare and other organizations of the neo-catechumenical way that held sway over John Paul II, though they held Opus Dei above critique. A number of Jesuits have actively opposed Lubich's beatification. And then there's an image there, a screenshot of the Focolare movement. It's the obituary of Bishop Javier Echevarria, who, let's see, I think he was the Spanish bishop and the head of the prelature of the Holy Cross and Opus Dei. So they were sort of acknowledging when he died. So I do think that there's some connection between the two, Focolare and Opus Dei, at least lightly. So then I have Selling Sacred Economies. In 1977, Chiara was awarded the Templeton Foundation Prize for Progress in Religion in London, an event attended by Prince Philip. And remember, I did that whole program about the Templeton Foundation and their intention to work on high-level physics and religion and free markets. The presentation was made at Guildhall, the ceremonial administrative building for the City of London and its corporation, and that feels significant. John Templeton made his fortune as a contrarian mutual fund investor turned philanthropist who had a keen interest in character education, planned reproduction, free markets, genius, religion, and theoretical physics. He became a UK citizen in the 1980s after moving to Nassau in the Bahamas, and he was knighted for his charity work by Queen Elizabeth II in 1987. At the close of her acceptance speech, Lubich quoted the converso Spanish mystic John of the Cross, who worked with Teresa of Avila to quote-unquote reform the Carmelite order in the late 16th century. And this is the quote, "Where you do not find love, put love, and you will find love." They do seem to know the power of love, and that's getting back to sort of the Taurus and the Kundalini energy and the power of love in the world. So this is a screenshot, and it has Sir John Templeton and Prince Philip and Chiara Lubich in 1977. And again, like, just think back to like the late 70s. That's where things were ramping up, right? Things were ramping up with ARPA. Things were ramping up with computing. At that point, they must have understood the direction that things were going. Focolare members gathered in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 1991 to launch the Economy of Communion, or EOC, a premise that involves private enterprise solving social problems. Business owners, workers, and customers dedicate a portion of their profits to uplift people out of poverty. The effort promotes vaccines for all, climate-related investing, and an examination of individual behaviors around people and the planet in a spiritual context. Last October, Fordham University hosted a 4-part series on EOC with Columbia University professor Jeffrey Sachs. Sachs, an economist specializing in the transition from planned to market-based economies, is president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and chair of the Lancet COVID-19 Commission. He's been an advisor to UN Secretaries General Antonio Guterres and General Ban Ki-moon on the Sustainable Development Goals, and has played an advisory role in the transition of Poland's economy in the 1980s. So this is all very significant. Over 1,000 corporations have signed on to the Economy of Communion, and while their website isn't all that impressive, the involvement of Fordham and Sachs does say something. There's also a rather strange 2018 paper published in the International Journal of Engineering and Technology sponsored by the Seoul National University of Science and Technology, that calls the economy of communion a, quote, new ideal economy. That's the actual title of the paper, and it feels very cybernetic circular economy systems engineering. It is clear that how that outlook meshes with the Vatican endorsement of inclusive capitalism in December of 2020 and the mobilization of Catholic investment dollars behind impact investing. And then I have a screenshot of the article, and it says the abstract states, the economy of communion is a business paradigm that has been developed from the praxis of the Focolare movement to reduce poverty and disseminate the culture of giving. The EOC business commits to allocating up to 2/3 of their profits for the help of people in need. In this regard, the movement is a new market economy philosophy between Marxism and capitalism. The paper overviews the EOC from the economic perspective and discusses the sustainability of the EOC business model and introduces cases of the EOC firms. So again, and that is South Korea, International Journal of Engineering and Technology. So I don't think that you can be that much clearer about the cybernetic plan. Elias Krim, the Alatea author, wrote about EOC in 2014 under the headline Economics as if People Mattered. 2014 was also the year that the Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative was established. Patricia Deneen, affiliated with the Boston Archdiocese and lead on impact investing for Catholic Relief Services, chairs that organization. Educated at the University of Pennsylvania, the London School of Economics, and MIT, she held positions in international telecommunications, the White House, and RAND before entering into private equity, managing emerging markets in BRICS nations, and heading the Advisory Council for Emerging Markets Private Equity Association. The following is an excerpt from Krim's article about Focolare and the origins of EOC. Quote, when Pope John Paul II's encyclical Centesimus Annus appeared in 1991, some American observers read it as a break with church tradition, suggesting it somehow endorsed a particular set of economic arrangements. For example, those of American-style free market capitalism, also known as neoliberalism. Focolare's founder, Chiara Lubich, read the document rather differently, perhaps more presciently, in fact. She did not read the Pope as bestowing a blessing on, quote, business as usual. Instead, she saw him calling for a social economy that was capable of orienting capitalistic society towards the common good rather than individualistic consumerism. Okay, so I think you can sort of see how this works with the cognitive capitalism, common fare, collectivism, decentralized democracy, and programmed happiness, right? So this is still from the article. The future Pope's interest in meeting and in Focolare generally was due to the heightened awareness of this group to the interrelationship between spirituality and socioeconomic life. The Focolare movement's special charism of unity, one which grew to include an economy of the gift, with its values of cooperation, sharing, and justice, was extended outward from an initial focus on family life to an influence on the larger community. This relational economy was indeed a form of capitalism, but with a strong emphasis on the human person rather than on a deterministic confidence in an invisible hand. And again, so they want to co-opt all of the social relationships and care and gift giving and the goodness of people into the machine, and they need to do that through the tokenization. Why is Krim so interested in this topic? Well, he's a Chicago-based writer who is currently founding editor of Ownership Matters, a bi-weekly newsletter focused on impact investing, racial equity, and the solidarity economy. He previously managed a $2 million U.S. Department of Education grant for character education in the Chicago schools. He founded Solidarity Hall, a podcast and publisher featuring works on radical Christianity, the new economy, and localism. And he assisted Molly Burhans on her Good Lands project to map Catholic holdings and make land, quote unquote, work for good. She was featured in The New Yorker. So yes, we are supposed to believe a young college student just happened to be staying at a Rome hostel, cold called Vatican officials, and got the chance to pitch her cartographic database skills. Narrative shaping. So we can see how the story is used to package free market exchange as the gift economy or sacred economics. As the age of cybernetic enclosures and programmable finance tightens its grip on refugees the poor and those thrown out of work by the economic upheaval. Propagandists are working overtime to convince us that disruption is merely the opening act for an age of digital abundance. No mention of the ubiquitous surveillance that is being baked into this transition. And then I have a screenshot of Cello, and it says, this is from their Substack, I think, or maybe their website, on sacred economics. Cello's philosophy is grounded in the work of Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics. And it has this, ironically, there's some grapes in the picture. There's, flowers and grapes. How do we change the world? Change the story. All right. So they're definitely all about changing the story and, turning securitization of behavior into the gift economy. That's what they're trying to, that's the tricky switch they're trying to pull. A current example in this duplicity is Yale alumnus Charles Eisenstein, author and speaker on Eastern spiritual teachings, indigenous culture, ecology, and the new economy, who recently made common cause with Cello, a social impact regenerative finance company that's doing the full court press to convince the world that beautiful money is the wave of the future. During the global lockdown, Cello took the opportunity in partnership with Impact Market, a decentralized poverty alleviation protocol, just tugs the strings at your heart, right? to seed a future customer base for universal basic income. Impact Market is already active in the refugee space in Africa. Cello's project involved a 30-year-old traditional weaving cooperative. Yes, a cooperative. In the Philippines that became destabilized when the tourist economy was taken out. The program offered members, who were mostly women with children at home, a small monthly stipend to offset their losses. But first they had to get smartphones, which they mostly borrowed from their children, and they had to learn the ropes of how to use digital money and these Valora wallets. So Valora is a peer-to-peer payment system based in San Francisco, and it had a $20 million funding round that was led by the blockchain crypto VC Mark Andreessen. And we've done 2 different podcasts with Jason on Mark Andreessen and on his wife, Laura Arrillaga Andreessen, who created social impact finance at Stanford. In a recent interview with the Rogan Experience, Andreessen discussed the importance of Metcalfe's law, X squared. Every connection you make to the network doubles its perceived value. That is the economic imperative, beyond social control that lies behind the no one gets left behind mixed reality campaign. Jason Bosch, Lynn Davenport, and I unpack that in an interview here. And then I have an image of Cello from their Medium page, Cello Foundation. It says, how Cello powered a small community of Philippine weavers to access international markets. And it's about a dozen like grandmothers and moms masked, all holding up their phones. Let's see. Oh, this is also from the screenshot. So it says the Nab Bakalan Loom Weavers Cooperative. And again, they're after the cooperative. They want that identity. In the Philippine municipality of Pauay, Ilocos Norte, was established in 1992 to organize the remaining practitioners of Inabel weaving, a traditional method of textile production seen only around Pauay Lake. Comprised mostly of women whose single source of income is from weaving, the cooperative had been a pivotal economic driver in the community. The Cello community, in cooperation with Impact Market, a crowdfunding platform built on the Cello blockchain, approached the cooperative to pilot an anti-poverty program using mobile technology. The weavers agreed, and for the following 7 months, the select members of the cooperative received an unconditional weekly income of 10 CUSD Cello dollars right to their phone via the Valora mobile wallet app. The CUSD received an equivalent of 490 to 500 PHP, and that meant financial security in a time of need. Because most weavers do not own smartphones, they had to borrow them from their children and then learn how to use the digital currency. The community members helped each other understand and navigate the applications and trust the program. Trust in the program was quickly formed. The weavers even agreed to designate 3 people to pool their CUSD to simplified encashment and reduce the total fees. And then it goes on. There's another one with Kotani Pay. Rio Impact Markets have UBI payments in Africa. And then there's an article from CoinDesk. A16Z, which is Andreessen, leads a $20 million bet that Cello's Valora becomes the global gateway to crypto. And this is all important if you think back to what I was talking about in let me just pop over here, the map. So, we're talking about cooperatives, and we're talking about, people who don't really understand, right? They don't even have a phone. How is it that they know what to do with digital money? But then, we've got these people out here like Will Ruddick and Leotaire who've known that they're planning on modeling multiple currencies in these simulations and controlling the villages through social physics, essentially through energy exchanges. And it's all being framed as empowerment and humanitarian aid. But they're not really telling people that the goal is to use the impact markets to train the singularity. And I think that's really rotten. I think it gets me very frustrated. Okay, so Cello's founder and spokesperson is Sepp Kanvar, the guy who invented Google's PageRank algorithm. And while working as the head of MIT's social computing group, started a Montessori-inspired pre-K franchise called Wildflower Montessori, where the children have to wear slippers with sensors in them so that the adults can track their social behaviors and what toys they played with in school. And this is real, okay? So your beautiful, sacred economy, gift economics, Charles Eisenstein, oh, by the way, Yale alum, whatever, is hanging out with the guy who would do that to children, like put sensors in their slippers and put sensors in the things in their classrooms so that they could track all of it and create a mirrored simulation of their social behavior. And that's really messed up. And yeah, so I think everybody should ask him about that. Okay, Cello's founder, okay, so, oh yeah. Oh, and there are also artificial vision cameras on the ceiling that feed the data of surveillance data on the children to dashboards so they can score the children. Eisenstein has not responded to repeated tweets asking him to clarify his relationship with Kanvar and Cello and explain how the company's use of his sacred economics branding is compatible with the heartfelt blog posts he writes about protesting digital futures. These characters are working all the angles to sell the masses on tokenized cooperatives as a wholesome remedy to the current brutal economic landscape, but it's not. For me, it's a gut punch to see that so many supporters refuse to look at the facts and hold individuals and institutions, whether Catholic or New Age or something else, accountable for the deceptions that they are so deftly spinning. And, I have a tweet. I said, I tweeted Charles Eisenstein to see if he authorized and supports use of his name and theory of sacred economics to promote blockchain microfinance by Cello. Sepp Kanvar, founder, uses cameras and IoT to collect kids' data in Wildflower Montessori schools. And, and this was before I realized that Eisenstein had done like multiple interviews with him that are on the web. So it wasn't like Cello was using the concept and misusing it against how Eisenstein endorses it. He actually does definitely endorse it. And I have quite a few tweets about that, documenting it. So, there was something in, let's see, this was in one of his posts. This is from June of 2022. It says, this is a quote from Eisenstein's writing. I have heard Stephen Jenkinson quoted as saying, there is no story in an argument and no argument in a story. The reasonable arguments why humanity is better off through its ascent into the controlled, distanced, artificial digital world, the metrics of well-being, leisure, and longevity, the economic logic of goods and services, the whole arc of progress. These present an unassailable tower of concrete and steel, but put them alongside the story of the faun, and without challenging them on their own terms, they are revealed as a castle of shadow and vapors. Shadows and vapors, zeros and ones, bits and bytes, the internet, the metaverse, the narratives of modernity are part of the same castle. It seems real from the inside, but for a gnawing unease, a secret sense that everything presented us as real and normal is actually fake. And so that's from his writing. And I replied to him and I said, please see this paragraph below. I'm trying very hard to understand how you square this with your ties to Sepp Kanvar and Cello. Do you not understand how his beautiful digital money system is exactly what you profess to have such a distaste for? It's not adding up. And then I linked to Cello. Like, that is the zeros and ones, the shadows and vapors, the castle. Like, he's promoting it. He's actually selling it to everyone. So in a Basque village, education for liberation or impact. Mondragon gained attention in the 1970s as a singular example of the unification of social justice with theology, worker empowerment through education. The firm has grown to include 280 companies, employing 81,000 people in 41 different countries. So again, let me just say that again. 280 companies employing 81,000 people in 41 different countries. It's very big. Mondragon is very big. Its products have moved far beyond sheet metal, paraffin heaters, and office furnitures of 70 years ago. Now it specializes in automated production lines for automotive and energy system fabrication. It also advocates circular economy practices. And then I have a map showing the sales and production around the world, a map of that. Jose Maria Arizmendiarrieta, the Jesuit founder of Mondragon Cooperative, was a seminarian during the Spanish Civil War. He was part of the Vitoria priest movement, guided by the teaching of Spanish Renaissance theologian and jurist Francisco de Vitoria. His training focused on Catholic social teaching grounded in the Rerum Novarum, rights and duties of capital and labor. Dominican Thomas scholar Tommaso Maria Zigliara prepared the encyclical that was issued by Pope Leo VIII in 1891 to address the suffering of workers caused by industrialization, a response to rising socialist sentiment that threatened to undermine the influence of the church and uplift state power. The document reasserted the importance of private property while laying out responsibilities of employers to provide dignified work suited to each person's capacity and for labor to refrain from violence and complete their tasks diligently. The Basque priest internalized the idea of hard work for the collective good being a tool of economic and spiritual liberation. He was taught by his mentor, Rufino Aldabalde, that the exclusion of God from society through industrialization and secularization had led to the Second World War. So I just want to say, like, this idea that the employers should do better in helping their workers, and then the workers should diligently do their tasks. Like, imagine what that looks like in the gig platform, cooperative platform program. Like, I think that that's a real concern. Because who gets to say, like, you can't live on $1,000 a month UBI. I mean, not in Philadelphia for sure. So, like, if that's the answer, if the new answer is that, okay, you join the platform cooperative and you do your social care work through your social prescribing for this basic tiny bit of money, is that what the employers are going to say is sufficient, even though it's not, and that it's for the common good? I mean, I feel like this is all coming together. Another influence on Arizmendiarrieta was Clement Attlee, the UK Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party from 1935 to 1955. Attlee was the Deputy Prime Minister under Churchill in 1942 and later presided over the partition of India. This was the era in which Michael Dunlop Young, the father of social entrepreneurship in England, shaped the agenda of Labour, including the creation of the National Health Service. This influence led Arizmendiarrieta to endorse the public-private partnership model, which he used in the development of a TB treatment facility and early housing cooperatives. And then I have an image, a screenshot of Clement Attlee with Winston Churchill at the London Victory Celebration of 1946. Attlee defeated Churchill by promising a new political settlement after the trauma of war. And so I'll just take a second and just revisit the map again in terms of remember, so the Fabian stuff segueing into the Michael Young social entrepreneurship post-World War II labor agenda and how it was meshing into the technological system, right? The social safety net welded into the digital cybernetic cyber-physical systems. And that's what Michael Young was a part of. Michael Young worked with Attlee, and then that segued, in the era after both Attlee and Young were already gone, into places like Jeff Mulgan, and that's where you have Jeff Mulgan's, sitting into the descent, which I think is interesting. Descent, like descent, like we're descending down, like we're going down. The descent project, that there is this direct connection between the two. That it's not so far, like the history is not so far back, but these, it's such a throwback to see 1946, like Attlee and Churchill, and they're sitting in this coach in top hats and waving at people. And these are the people who want to come and put us in Focolare towns and have us obey and be obedient and chaste and impoverished and do it for the collective good. Like that's what it feels like. In their 2008 profile, The Origins of Mondragon, Catholic Cooperativism and Social Movement in the Basque Valley of 1941 to 59, sociologists Fernando Molina and Antonio Miguez state that Ariz Mendiarrieta had a desire to create, quote, a new Christian order where through proper education and training, Basque peasants could morally be transformed while building a communitarian Christian practice of worker solidarity, and that would give them equal footing with their bosses and break the ruling class structure. When he arrived, the town was dealing with the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War, which had divided the community. The town's economy revolved around Union Carajera, a sheet metal company, and children of the elite had access to education and apprenticeship programs that enabled those within the network to control the managerial jobs, and the rest of the people had few opportunities for advancement. So again, this goes back to Nesta and world skills and managing skills and lifelong learning on the blockchain. The priests sought to mobilize the youth through sports and Catholic volunteer programs. Now, I'm going to point out again sports. I've talked a bit in the past about my thoughts on teaming and Internet of Things and the teaming. He was very successful at shaping public opinion, having refined his skills in narrative crafting while working at a Basque nationalist newspaper, Eguna, during his seminary years. Ariz Mendiarrieta targeted young men he thought could be molded to become redeemers of their class, and hosted weekly discussions on private property, capital and labor, social justice, or novel Catholic social theories, such as the dual salary, which sought to divide salaries into the portion of consumption and one for investment. The priest centered the idea of emancipatory education and dignified work promoted by French Catholic philosophers Jean Leclerc, French Benedictine monk known for writing The Love of Learning and the Desire for God, a study of monastic culture, and Jacques Maritain, a Thomist who helped develop the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Emphasis was placed on learning in the service of others, which supported the eventual expansion of the Mondragon cooperative model. And like within that, let me see, I do want to, do a quick shift real quick. I want to see if I can, the BBC Learning Economy. This is what's coming, guys. I mean, this is what I've been talking about. This idea of education being a currency, and that's what Nesta was working on. I mean, that's why they started off in 2011. Their very first thing was this future lab, EdTech in schools, EdTech in gaming, and because EdTech is going to be these darn crypto gaming things, I think, and then moving on at the end towards these world skills jobs. That's where it's going to come. That's where it's going next, is this education as a currency. I think I've messed up my thing, but yeah. So education is the new currency, and then the Learning Economy Foundation is the other thing that I keep wishing people would pay more attention to. This idea that they're going to create these new systems. I mean, this tells you exactly what's happening. Leapfrogging. The Center for Universal Education, which is backed by Brookings, and Brookings is also doing the interspecies currency. There's an image here of this Learn card, which is on a phone. It looks like a rewards card or a credit card with a chip, but it literally is just a picture on your phone with a QR code. They're tracking your spending activity. They have a balance on it, so this is probably some sort of UBI. It shows your wallet that within the money you've earned, there are 6 different kinds of currencies, 3 different IDs, identity cards, 40 skills that are logged, that's for the remote labor, 30 achievements, that's for your social credit, your learning history, and your job history. So it's all being layered in on this blockchain identity, and then they have the learning card image here that shows, it implies it's like a multi-card wallet, right? That you have a student ID, a driver's license, and your passport, that all of this is pulled together in one QR code that represents you and your digital twin. And it specifically builds off of, it mentions M-Pesa in Kenya, and we know that Kenya is one of the centers for these social currencies, and also Estonia. Estonia is the blockchain nation, the digital citizenship, the digital government, and Tim Draper was one of the first digital citizens of Estonia, and he's also an advisor to Bancor. All right, so just going back to Mondragon. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, this one. All right, so sport, recruiting, the right people, pitching people on social teachings and financial markets, and like the new kind of Christian, world that they're building. There was a whole documentary about him in 2018, El Hombre Cooperativo. Again, like if you can do the sleight of hand to turn sort of probably fascist, work programs into cooperatives and make it sound nice. I mean, this is essentially what they're trying to do. A love of learning. Like who doesn't love learning, right? Learning on the blockchain. With support from local businesses, the priests launched the Professional School of Mondragon with the goal of, quote, socializing knowledge to democratize power. So you can see that learning economy concept. It goes all the way back. Technical education and training has always been a central feature of the Mondragon program, which is important to remember as we consider the place of this model in human capital reskilling tied to data-driven investments by social entrepreneurs today, not to mention the metadata captured from online learning that is being leveraged to train our AI replacements. While the priest had hoped to be able to change the corporate culture at Union Carrera from within by training up through subsidization of the education of a cohort of young managers, he was not successful. In 1956, a group broke off and petitioned to create a new Christian company, Ulgor. Their first product line was kerosene stoves. The business thrived under Spain's stabilization plan that was put in place by Franco in 1959. That backed off the dictator's previous efforts at autarky, industrial self-sufficiency, and began to liberalize the country's economy, allowing for growth in exports. Over time, Mondragon expanded production to include a range of home appliances. The education component remained central, with 3 interrelated programs that operated in affiliation with the University of the Basque Country for its first 4 decades. Mondragon University was incorporated as an independent university in 1997, and today it has 4,000 students who study engineering, business, entrepreneurship, communication, gastronomy, education, cooperatism, and social innovation. The school partners with ESADE, Spain's influential Jesuit-affiliated MBA program, and it is second only to IESE, the Opus Dei affiliate. Today, ESAID and IESE hold substantial sway over business operations in Spain, maintaining extensive networks of alumni that include over a quarter of the board members of the IBEX 35, the index of Spain's principal stock exchange, with particular representation in the telecommunications sector. ESAID created a Center for Social Impact in 2017, and in 2020 joined with Comillas Universidad Pontificia and Universidad de Deusto, 2 other Jesuit institutions, to create a special postgraduate program of study for international management with a focus on helping others through the development of social impact enterprise. And so I just want to mention here, like within the education of being technical, like I think that's going to be a lot of coding boot camps in cybersecurity, because that's what they need to build out this next layer. Like that's the layer that is going to be coming, is the coding. And so one of the articles I read recently, they were talking about, like in this descent, like having community participation, and then they all agreed to have like a computer training program, right? Because everybody, I mean, it's the thumb is on the scale for what they actually want. So these universities are all working in tandem to sort of build out this cyber physical reality. A credit union was added in 1959, Caja Laboral Popular. And its descendant, Laboral Cutska, has 400 offices and is the 3rd largest credit union in Spain. And I will point out that the credit unions were among the first to dip into digital identity. The credit union was vital to business expansion because each member business would put 40% of their after-tax profits into the funds for research through the university or solidarity. The remainder, after a 10% distribution to charity, was deposited to cover worker pensions, and all of the funds held could then be used to offer low-rate loans to support business expansion among members. Given the amount of funding that is anticipated to run through human capital related projects, Mondragon Corporation could be in a position to channel a lot of money through worker reskilling at their technical university. The financial infrastructure is already in place, integrated into the program from the beginning, and complements their history of faith-based philanthropy. I think a similar dynamic linking well-being metrics and human capital investments could be in play in the United States with plans for public banking. So the public banking stuff is all in bed with the modern monetary theory and the community, cooperative community currencies and complementary currencies. Like all of these people are in the digital weeds. And then I have an image that is of the Pope with a lot of people in suits on the inclusive capitalism, like the Vatican support for inclusive capitalism, working together to change capitalism for good. We are mobilizing the private sector to create a more inclusive, sustainable, and trusted economic system. And of course, where you see trust, read blockchain. Ignatius of Loyola, 1491 to 1556, founder of the religious order of the Society of Jesus or Jesuits, was born in as Pietia. He was the most famous Catholic priest from the Basque region. Pope Francis, of course, is the first Jesuit pope, one with some skeletons in his closet from Argentina's dirty wars. Pope Francis has thus far issued 3 encyclicals: Evangelii Gaudium in 2007, that announced a new era of evangelism, in which chapter 4 speaks specifically about care for the weak and poor; Laudato Si in 2015, critiquing consumerism and advancing environmental and climate concerns; and number 3, Gaudete ex Exsultate, a universal call to holiness in 2018. The following paragraph is taken from a website promoting the canonization of Arismendiarietia, which is consistent with stakeholder capitalism. Quote, the basis of Christian... This is the quote. The basis of the Christian endeavor he founded was a group of young people who are very good Christians, and I would even go so far as to say they are good apostles. He wished to fulfill the dictate made by Pope Pius IX in his encyclical Quadragesimo Anno. The result, following on from professional school, was the creation of Ulgor, the San Jose Cooperative Society, which would later become Araski, the Caja Laboral Savings Bank, and other cooperative enterprises. He considered that workers will not believe in the church's social doctrine if they cannot see it put into practice through work for society. And he added, and I bolded this, the cooperative formula requires human activity in order to share and implement higher human values and work. Capital and organization are therefore not its ends in themselves, but means for serving human interests. Okay, so that idea that the human activity and the sharing and the collective is part of something higher, I think it is the aspiration towards that they want to feed that into the machine. In the United States, quite a few of the institutions at the forefront of advancing social impact finance, digital governance, and data analytics are affiliated with the Jesuits. Santa Clara University, Gonzaga University, Boston College, Fordham University, Loyola University, and Georgetown University. In my opinion, the Jesuits' history of mass conversion of colonized people through control of labor for large-scale agricultural projects, standardized education, and enforced faith practices cannot be discounted moving forward. Look to the history of the original people and enslaved Africans that Jesuits used to subjugate the lands of Brazil and use their aldeias, small villages, to instill social norms. And this is a quote. From the Indians, the aldeias meant a new and inhabited living space. The customs, as well as the structural layout of the village, must have been very strange for the Indios, given their previous living environment. Besides the living conditions, the aldeias created a new identity for the people. The all-encompassing Aldea Indian was created and applied to Indians from different tribes with different cultures and languages. For the Jesuits, the Aldeias represented spaces for realizing a utopia which they had already formulated in Europe. The missionary movement was strengthened in the counter-reform to fight evangelization. So the Jesuits saw in the peoples who were discovered during the Portuguese expansionist movement an opportunity to shape Christianity and form a Catholic community free from the problems which suffered the church at home in Europe. Because of this plan to create a purer and better Christianity abroad, the Jesuits in Brazil tried to keep a strategic alliance with the Portuguese crown. Like the priest Antonio Vieira said, quote, "They dreamed of creating a worldwide realm of Portuguese Catholicism." And that's the end of that section. And that's going to come into play again. Let me see. Picture. You know what? I've messed up my map. Let me see if it's, let me try it again. The Brazil piece, I did a whole series on Brazil, and it was really good. I probably need to go back and read those myself and pay attention to what that's about. But this gentleman, Carlos de Freitas, he was one of the other panelists on the dissent group, and he was the former coordinator in Europe for this Palmas currency, and he's now in sustainable finance. But this Banco Palmas was essentially a community currency that has now become a test lab for digital fintech that's scaled across a lot of banking systems serving low-income communities throughout Brazil, but it started in Fortaleza. And the gentleman who helped establish it, and he was an Ashoka changemaker in 2004, was Joaquim de Melo Neto Segundo, and he was a seminarian, and he was trained as a priest. So, you know, the Brazil connection, the Jesuit, the creation of intentional community, and a community, and you know, I'm not slamming people's face. I'm just saying there is a certain level of programming that comes along with that. And I think we need to be able to look at, like, you know, I've used the word digital conquistadors, you know, the conquest system and how consent factors into it. Because when I was, you know, doing that site visit in Asbury Park and Ocean Grove, if we're being optimized by our environment and by our currencies and by our societies, you know, and this goes back to sort of the social force of conditioning, what happens if we accidentally wander into a situation where we're being optimized for something that isn't our destiny, that isn't our fate, right? Like, what if you were the Asbury Park rock and roller who is being optimized to the, you know, Ocean Grove Methodist Church movement, organ music, you know, form of society, or vice versa? Like, none of those, like, we should be able to have diversity, and even the idea that you can program society, program these cooperatives, and enforce it with smart contract laws by machines. I mean, I think people imagine that we're still going to have a handle on this thing, but ultimately, if it goes the way they hope that it will go, the machines and the smart contracts, the logic, the rigorous logic of applied to the chaos of the built environment is going to turn life into something very different. So anyway, so this is my last paragraph. I imagine that the aldeias are not so different from the Focolare towns or the charter cities for refugees. The networked built environment will be constructed with encoded social values and used to attempt to transition us from our original biological state to Nicholas Berggrun's planned transition to holographic life. So, and that will be continued in part 3. So anyway, I hope you got something out of this. I guess I've been going on for a good amount of time. I seem to always hit like 2 hours and 45 minutes for these things. But yeah, it was good to revisit all of this stuff, right? Brazil, Barcelona, encoding, society, understanding our place and understanding it over time and how it can be imposed. So I guess I'll tune out now.